21. Which card to choose? Until the feast ended and everyone returned to their houses, Ted remained the center of attention. It wasn't the blatant kind of staring, but that furtive, half-curious look. People wanted to see but didn't dare, afraid of being caught. Every time Ted glanced back, they hurriedly looked away. The students' whispers were the same wherever he went. Confirmed, he's a big deal. Don't provoke him. Don't provoke him. After the feast, each house followed its head boy or head girl back to the dormitories. Ravenclaw's common room was farther than the others. It wasn't in the main tower courtyard, but in a tower at the Astronomy Tower complex, across a stone bridge. Ravens and eagles both need high places, but Ravenclaw's common room really tested that idea. It felt like climbing a dozen flights of stairs, head spinning from the ascent, before they finally reached the venerable bronze eagle guarding the door. Each house had its own gatekeeper. Gryffindor's was a portrait that required a password. Slytherin's door was magically sealed and also needed a password. Hufflepuff's entrance was a stack of wooden barrels and required a particular knocking rhythm. Ravenclaw's gate was a giant bronze eagle set into the door. You had to answer its question to be admitted. At the very top of Ravenclaw Tower, the first years were breathless in front of the old, weathered wooden door. The bronze eagle on it held a large knocker in its talons. Penelope Clearwater, Ravenclaw's head girl, pointed to the eagle. "Knock on it," she said. "The eagle will ask you a question. Answer correctly, and the door will open. We welcome visitors, if they can answer." The bronze eagle's questions were notorious and always changing. Over 1,000 years, the question bank had grown enormous. Astronomy, geography, riddles, clever wordplay. The knocker sounded, dong, dong, dong. The eagle's head turned and regarded them all. "Between a ghost and Peeves, who lives longer?" it asked. "A ghost," Penelope answered. "Peeves was never truly alive." "Makes sense." Click. The door opened and the students filed in. Ravenclaw's common room was a large circular room draped in blue and bronze silk. Tall arched windows looked out over the grounds. The ceiling was a domed sweep studded with stars, and the deep blue carpet below was likewise flecked with stars. Tables and bookshelves ringed the room, and in a niche opposite the door stood a white marble bust of Rowena Ravenclaw. On either side of the statue, staircases led up to the boys' and girls' dormitories. Ravenclaw had a reputation for being quietly clever, though in the original 7 years, no standout celebrity had emerged from it. Ted remembered a theory he'd run across in his previous life about Ravenclaw's motto. Its usual translation was, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure," meaning extraordinary wisdom is humanity's greatest prize. But in older usage, the word wit could carry a bawdier connotation. Reinterpreted, tongue-in-cheek, the phrase could read as something far less academic. An extremely long male member is a man's greatest treasure. Ted couldn't help laughing. Hermione, beside him, glanced up. "What are you laughing at?" That was the exact expression you couldn't tell that joke to. Ted changed the subject. "I just thought of something amusing. So what do you know about Ravenclaw?" The safest way to distract Hermione was with trivia. She immediately dove into an endless run of facts about Ravenclaw. Exhausted after the day, and with night closing in, Ted and Hermione said goodnight and climbed the stairs to their dormitories. At least Ravenclaw's dormitories were actually in the tower. Slytherin and Hufflepuff were down in the dungeons, close to what Ted likened to the windswept highlands. That year, Ravenclaw had 9 students total. 4 boys shared one dormitory. The dorm held 4 poster beds, perfect for hanging curtains, and each bed bore a brass nameplate. Luggage had already been tucked under beds. Ansu was with them. Ravens and owls did not mix well, and though Hogwarts had an owlery, Ansu preferred not to stay there. He hung upside down from a curtain, playing with a glass bead Ted had given him. Big corvids loved shiny things. "What are you looking at? Caw!" Ansu suddenly said to one of the boys, startling him. "You can talk?" the boy stammered. "Can't you? Caw." Ansu chatted away as if it were the most natural thing. Ted was the last to arrive, having lingered with Hermione. His new roommates greeted him in turn. "Oh, hello, Anthony Goldstein. I'm Michael Corner. Terry Boot." Terry had been the one Ansu addressed. The 3 boys weren't conspicuous figures in the original story, neither brilliant nor famous, but they had the sensible instinct for self-preservation. "Hello, everyone. I'm Ted Epiphany," Ted said. We know, we know. That song at the feast was brilliant, Anthony declared. Clearly, Ted's impressive entrance had made its mark. After a quick wash, Ted fashioned a little nest for Ansu from an old shirt, drew his bed curtains, and lay down. Wizards could use Accio and other charms for personal hygiene, but that required a steadier hand than his. One slip and a spell could shave off more than intended. Still, despite being tired, he didn't fall asleep right away. Claim quest rewards, he murmured inwardly to the system. Reward Magic World. Green. Choose one of 3 cards. 3 cards appeared in his mind. Experience card, blue. A card dissolving into blue light with the text plus 1000 EXP. Use. Gain 1000 experience. One-time use. Spell Mastery, blue. A glowing brain pattern with spell LV1. Use +1 spell level for 10 minutes. Cooldown 24 hours. Since Ted's current spell level was only level 1, this would effectively double his spell level for a short time. Ravenclaw's Wisdom, blue. A raven's claw holding a glowing diadem with +2 intelligence, 1 spirit. Use. +2 intelligence, +1 spirit for 1 hour. Cooldown 12 hours. Can be used at most twice a day. Experience was tempting, but accumulates slowly. The temporary spell level boost was powerful but fleeting. The Ravenclaw buff would immediately improve his learning ability and spirit, more useful for long-term development. He chose Ravenclaw's Wisdom, blue. Another quest. Come on, show it! Green also gave him a choice of 3 cards. Phantom Sound, green. Consume a small amount of psionic energy to create a sound nearby. Cooldown 5 minutes. Magic Figurine, Eastern Dancer, green. Summon a palm-sized magical figurine to dance for you for 10 minutes. Cooldown 3 hours. Note, it's tiny. Mysterious Dance Flute, green. A short red and white flute. Playing it causes nearby creatures to dance along. Phantom Sound could be replicated by magic, and a dancing figurine was charming but a little embarrassing. A flute that compelled everyone to dance, though, that was too useful to pass up. He chose the Mysterious Dance Flute, green. Ted's current attributes read like this. Ted Epiphany level Wizard. Level 1, Mind Mage level 1. Experience pool, 1162 attributes. Average adult Muggle. Strength 3 Constitution, 3 Agility, 4 Intelligence, 6 Perception, 7 Spirit, 9 Charm, 7 Luck. Unknown, Normal People 0, fluctuates. Talents, Otherworld Knowledge, Gold. Skills, Magic Power Elv 2, Magic Resistance Elv 1, Spell 1, Mind Power Elv 1, Mental Resistance Elv 2, Prophecy Elv 1. Spells, Lumos Elv 1, Scouring Charm Elv 1, Mending Charm Elv 1, Aqua Ructo Elv 1, Packing Charm Elv 1, Bubblehead Charm Elv 1. Psionics, Appraisal, Memory Palace, Spirit Crystal Servant, not yet cast. Reading, Charm Art, Occlumency. Cards restore stamina, green. Wild Boar Firecracker, green. Ravenclaw's Wisdom, blue. Mysterious Dance Flute, green. Quests, Again and Again. Stroke Her, green. Explore Hogwarts, red. The corridor on the right on the 3rd floor, right? Now that his magic power had reached level 2, Ted could feel the magic in his body more abundant and active. With Restore Stamina and Ravenclaw's Wisdom boosting his body, intelligence, and spirit, he imagined himself becoming an unstoppable academic, outperforming everyone. He laughed quietly at the thought. Satisfied, Ted closed the interface and fell asleep easily. He slept soundly until dawn, waking refreshed, with no lingering fatigue, much to the satisfaction of the healers at St. Mungo's, who always insisted he was very healthy. The next day, while the sun was still struggling above the horizon, Ted's 2-month-old internal clock woke him. His roommates were still asleep. He tiptoed out of bed to dress and wash. Only Ansu, curled up in his nest, opened one eye to look at him before burying his head under his wing again and refusing to get up. After he finished, Ted checked his backpack. Pens, ink, and textbooks were all there. He waved at Ansu. The bird spread his wings and fluttered onto Ted's shoulder. Ted was about to say something, then stopped and pointed at the sleeping roommates. Ansu tilted his head, nodded, and stayed quiet. About an hour later, at 7:30, Hermione came down into the common room with her satchel. She and Ted had agreed to meet there. She found him at a desk by the wall, reading a book titled Basic Magic Theory and taking notes. Ansu sat on the windowsill, watching the grounds, and fluffed up at the sight of Hermione. "Good morning, Ansu," Hermione greeted. "Morning," Ted said, waving, and started packing his things. As expected in Ravenclaw, a few other students were already studying quietly. 3 or 4 scattered around the room. Hermione felt a twinge of self-reproach. She had let herself slack off on the first day. If she'd known Ted would beat her to the common room and was already skimming through that book, she'd have been even more embarrassed. There wasn't time to make up for it now. They walked together to the Great Hall. The ancient castle corridors seemed to condense time. Murals, statues, and suits of armor all carried the weight of ages. The portraits and armor moved and shifted, the portraits going about their business and the armor adjusting its stance or even changing places. Above them, the staircases constantly rearranged themselves. According to Hogwarts A History, there are 142 staircases, Hermione said with a frown as they descended into the main tower complex. They all have different shapes, and they keep changing. Every Friday, some of them connect to odd places, and sometimes you only go halfway up before the top half disappears. First years get lost and end up late all the time. That's true, Ted said. Learning the routes is probably our main task for a while. We'll need to find classrooms ahead of time. Hogwarts really was a maze, built long ago when there was little distinction between wizards and muggles and a great need for defenses. The confusing routes were deliberate. Fortunately, Ted's sense of direction had always been good, and becoming a mind mage had sharpened his memory, so he led Hermione to the Great Hall without trouble. The 4 long tables were empty. They were the first to arrive. They sat and began to study. Having someone to study with made a big difference. 90 minutes passed comfortably before other students trickled in, mostly older years who already knew their way. Penelope, the head girl they'd met the day before, noticed Ted and Hermione and smiled. Studiousness was a Ravenclaw virtue she liked to encourage. She walked over, placed a parchment on the table, and tapped her wand. Gemino! The parchment produced 2 copies. These are the first-year Ravenclaw timetables, she said. Copy one for yourselves. The copies from Gemino don't last long. Thanks, Ted said. Hermione quickly took a copy and began to read. Penelope waved it off. It's my duty. Ted scanned the timetable. It listed not only courses, but precise times. Breakfast from 8 to 10, first class at 9, lunch 11 to 12, afternoon classes starting at 13, dinner served from 16 to 19, like a long self-service meal period, and many Friday afternoons free, effectively an extra half-day. Start of term and holiday feasts had different hours, beginning at 1800 and lasting 2 hours. Curfew for younger students was 21. Older students could stay out until 22. Students weren't allowed to leave the common room after curfew. Night roaming meant points lost and detention if caught. Other than formal schedules and curfew, time was theirs for clubs, Quidditch, or makeup lessons. Hogwarts ran on a 3-term year with Christmas, Easter, and summer breaks. From 3rd year, students could visit Hogsmeade on weekends when there were no classes, and 3rd year was when electives began. Overachievers could take all 12 subjects. Those less ambitious could stick to required classes: Transfiguration, Charms, Potions, Herbology, and History of Magic. Soon their Gryffindor friends arrived, looking rumpled and out of breath. Harry had already started complaining. Blasted stairs. They nearly had us running into the dungeons. If you hadn't said you knew the way, we wouldn't have gone underground, Ron grumbled, straightening his crooked robe and wincing as if still out of breath. Are you blaming me? Harry narrowed her eyes, and Ron fell immediately silent. Jerry smoothed things over. Well, we're here now, aren't we? It's fine. The stairs are mischievous, aren't they, Neville? Neville nodded quickly. Very mischievous. By the time they reached the table, the feast had started. Plates, bowls, and goblets were already laid out. Everyone dug in. Pass the pie, Jerry asked. I want a chicken leg. Make that 2, Ron said with his mouth full. Ansu chirped, get me some fries, while Neville kept his head down, concentrating on his food. Harry, not eating properly, leaned in to check the timetables. Our first class is together, she said after comparing schedules. What class? Jerry asked. Transfiguration. 2 hours. Professor McGonagall. Ron's mouth was still full as he spoke. We'll need to get there early. First years had Transfiguration, Charms, and Herbology 3 times a week, each lesson 2 hours. Potions, flying, history of magic, astronomy, and defense against the dark arts were once a week, lasting 1 to 2 hours. Core subjects were heavy in the lower years. Electives came later. While they were comparing schedules, there was a bang behind them. Hermione, reading beside Ted, jumped. Everyone turned to see Seamus, one of Ron and Neville's housemates and famous for his misfired experiments, staggering in with a blackened face and smoke still drifting from his hair. He'd tried to spell at breakfast to turn juice into wine and made a rather spectacular explosion instead. The great hall filled with laughter and good-natured noise. Ravenclaw, -5 points. Ravenclaw, -5 points. The announcement bounced around the great hall. Dozens of owls swooped in and fluttered about, and the sudden commotion made Ansu downright irritable. Ravens and owls never got along perfectly in the wild, and the sight of them all crowded in only annoyed him more. A snowy owl glided to a landing on the table in front of Harry, extending a leg until Harry unhooked the letter. "Thanks, Hedwig," Harry said, smiling as he opened it. His owl was still a snowy owl and still called Hedwig, a comfortable bit of continuity. The letter was from Sirius, fretting that Harry might not get used to Hogwarts. Harry skimmed it, rolled his eyes, and said, "As if, I'm fine." A cry went up nearby. "Oh my, someone tried to rob Gringotts. Are you kidding me?" A cluster of students gathered to read the Daily Prophet spread on a tablet. The headline described a break-in at Gringotts. A dark wizard had entered a vault and nearly been caught by the goblins, but the thief had escaped empty-handed. The report caused plenty of gossip. Ted's first thought was the stone. Nothing about that report ruled it out, but he decided it wasn't his business right now. Still, he thought, the goblins probably staged the whole thing. Foolproof, he muttered to himself. Nonsense. At that moment, Neville's owl arrived with a small parcel. Neville unpacked a remembrall. "If red smoke appears, it means I've forgotten something important," he said, and the glass immediately flushed a vivid red. Neville's face crumpled. After a long, distracted silence, he managed, I can't remember what I forgot." Jerry peered over. "Well, that's, Ron, useless." Ted clapped him on the shoulder. "You should carry a little notebook and jot things down. If the remembrall turns red, check the notes. There's an old Eastern saying, a good memory can't beat a diligent quill. And chain the notebook to yourself so you don't leave it behind." Neville's eyes widened. After a moment, he breathed, "Ted, that's brilliant." Everyone laughed, and breakfast ended in good humor. They headed off for Transfiguration, asking older students and portraits for directions. The Transfiguration classroom was on the second floor. The 6 of them arrived early. The room was still empty, except for a silver tabby British Shorthair perched on the podium. Ted knew that cat, of course he did, but he pretended he hadn't noticed. Then, in a flash, he darted forward. Before the cat could escape, he scooped it up. The tabby blinked, startled. "You again?" But then a strange scent hit it, and something like giddy excitement washed through the cat. It started to knead and rub against him. Ted grinned inwardly. Catnip. He had a task. Once more, pet her. Green. And this was his chance. The task demanded that he pet Professor McGonagall in her animagus form again, a rare opportunity. McGonagall only showed herself as a cat for the first lesson, to make a point and pique curiosity. After that, everyone would know her secret, and petting her would be an obvious provocation. This was the only time Ted could plausibly risk it. He pressed the soft pads of the paw and felt the cat's claws extend. Proof this truly was an animagus and not a mere illusion. Brilliant. Animagus is advanced transfiguration indeed. Ding. Task completed. Once more. Pet reward, 250 XP. Transfiguration +1 level. Ted let out a silent breath of relief and relaxed his hold. The cat, revived from its catnip days, squirmed free, leapt down and bolted for the door. Ansu, curious as ever, soared after it, cawing. "Ansu, don't fly off. Come back!" Ted called. If McGonagall decided to be cross, he didn't want his raven turned into a teapot or himself left pleading at the headmistress's feet. A couple of late arrivals peered in the doorway. "Where did that cat come from? Does Professor McGonagall keep a pet?" McGonagall reappeared at her office, locked the door, smoothed her hair, and composed herself. She suspected someone had meddled with her cat, but had no proof, yet. She kept her expression severe as she entered the classroom. Every student quieted, her gaze fixed on Ted until he gave a nervous, ingratiating smile. "Disregarding classroom discipline, being cheeky, Ravenclaw -5 points," she pronounced. The Ravenclaws looked stunned. Neville's face registered alarm. Harry, Ron, and Hermione all blinked in surprise. Jerry merely shrugged. Tails, after all, didn't bother him. Ted stared, incredulous. A smile could cost points, and it had triggered a task? Ding. Triggered task. A student life without deducted points is incomplete. The notification popped into Ted's head like a bell. Many years from now, teachers will forget those excellent students, but they will remember the mischievous ones. Goal: deduct 100 points from Ravenclaw in the first school year. Progress: 5 100s. Reward: 300 XP, random card. McGonagall raised an eyebrow at the whole class. To show them the dangers of transfiguration, she snapped her fingers and transformed a desk into a wild boar. It charged once around the room, sending a flock of students scrambling onto their chairs before turning back into a desk. For those who do not understand the complexity and danger of transfiguration, let this be a warning, she said. A teacup under a glass dome floated over the desk. A second-year student's long-ago experiment had left the cup with a mouse's tail permanently growing from its rim. I imagine none of you would like strange things growing on your bodies, McGonagall added. Heads nodded rapidly. Only Jerry looked unconcerned. A tail? Big deal. I have one already. Turn to page 1 of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, McGonagall continued. Today we will discuss the basic principles of transfiguration. Another chime of sound interrupted her. Ding. Triggered task. Transfiguration white. The task explained itself. Transfiguration is a very important branch of magic. With a famous professor to guide you, you must learn and practice diligently. Goal: successfully cast a transfiguration once in this class. Reward: 150 XP. Ted felt the pressure. He'd just gained a level in transfiguration, but he'd never actually tried it before. He straightened up, produced a fountain pen and his notebook, and took furious notes as McGonagall worked through the theory. The castle preferred quills, but Ted wrote faster with his pen. He made a mental note to see if he could automate it someday, without breaking ministry rules. Ding. You listened carefully to Professor McGonagall's explanation and gained a deeper understanding of transfiguration. Experience plus 35. Ted couldn't suppress a grin. Experience for paying attention. What a pleasant surprise. After a half hour of theory, McGonagall handed out practical exercises. Their first assignment: turn matches into needles. And you, my friend, you are a true warrior, the twins chorused before disappearing into the humming quiet of the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall had handed everyone a match and set them to work. The little wizards had almost no mastery of their own magic yet. If anything, none at all. Even spells that were supposed to be simple were disobedient in inexperienced hands. Transfiguration, which depends entirely on will and imagination rather than a single incantation, was a whole different level. Most students waved their wands and got nothing. The matches stayed stubbornly unchanged. A few matches did react, but those were the ones that were dangerous. Sizzle, boom. Seamus made his match combust into a flash and a puff of ash. The noise jolted Ansu, who'd been half asleep in the lecture. "Caw, cow, you scared the life out of me," he squawked. Ted quickly shooed him down, worried that McGonagall would notice and clamp his mouth shut. He'd always suspected Seamus had a talent for fire. Hermione glanced over at Seamus and at his deskmate's singed hair and murmured, "Professor McGonagall was right. Transfiguration is dangerous." "Perhaps the person is the dangerous one," Ted muttered. After repeated attempts, a few talented students began to make progress. Hermione's match trembled and deformed like softened clay, then stubbornly snapped back to its original shape after 2 seconds. Ted did slightly better. His match extended longer and thinner and held that shape a little longer before collapsing back. Professor McGonagall moved among them, reminding everyone to concentrate, to gather their will, to picture a needle. "Spirit and will," she said. "That is the key to transfiguration. You must find the focus through practice." Near the end of class, Ted finally managed to stretch his match into something resembling a wooden toothpick. Ding, quest completed. Transfiguration. Reward: 150 experience. Professor McGonagall picked the slender bit of wood from Ted's desk and glanced up, only softening when he adopted an obedient, eager look. "Well done. Ravenclaw gets 5 points." Ted felt a small rush. Points, back on the board. Professor McGonagall then inspected Hermione's match. Ted's deskmate, and nodded at the slightly pointed wooden peg she'd managed. Ravenclaw gets 2 points. Ding, quest triggered. House model. It is every student's duty to fight for the House Cup. Goal, earn 100 points for Ravenclaw in your first year. Progress, 5/100. Reward, 300 experience, random card. Ted's smile grew a little strained. One could dream. 100 points sounded like the sort of heroics reserved for Gryffindor. He took the point anyway. By the time class ended, only Ted and Hermione had produced any stable change. This was a fair bit harder than what Ted remembered from the story. Hermione had seemed to succeed effortlessly there. McGonagall's warning had been right. Transfiguration would not be mastered in a day. The two of them clearly had talent. The rest of the class would need practice. Before dismissing them, McGonagall set 8 inches of homework and insisted they continue practicing, saying she would inspect their progress next lesson. 2 hours of wand waving had made arms ache. At lunch in the Great Hall, under the transparent ceiling that made the room feel like a bright picnic, the students clustered together. Hermione kept her nose in her Transfiguration textbook during the wait, making Ron and Jerry edge away in nervous 2-man huddles. "Her diligence terrifies me," Ron muttered. Hermione barely looked up. Jerry peered over at Neville and suddenly wore a face of despair like someone about to be steamrolled. Ted closed his notebook and set it aside. "Study when it's time to study. Eat when it's time to eat," he advised. "Exactly," Ron echoed. "Study when it's time to study. Eat when it's time to eat." Hermione snapped her book shut and picked up her knife and fork. "Good students listen to better people," Harry observed approvingly. Before Ted could enjoy his food, 2 redheads materialized at either side of him, Fred and George Weasley, one on his left and one on his right, grinning like twin heralds. "Please allow us to introduce ourselves," George said with a flourish. "He's George, and I'm Fred," Fred chimed. Ted dropped his fork, extended a hand, and shook both of theirs. "I'm Ted." "My dear fellow," George murmured conspiratorially, "we heard you hug Professor McGonagall when she was a cat." Everyone at the table stiffened. "Professor McGonagall as a cat?" Harry asked. Fred's smile widened. "She's an animagus, turns into a tabby with a silver belly. When she jumps down from the podium and becomes a woman again, it's a real show. We were all speechless the first time." They each clapped a hand on Ted's shoulder and said in perfect unison, "And you, my friend, you are a true warrior." Charms class began at 1. It was paired with Slytherin, so students from different houses mixed, part of a timetable that made sure the houses saw each other regularly. The Charms classroom sat on the 4th floor in tiers, cluttered with books. Professor Phileas Flitwick, short, quick, possibly part goblin, according to rumor, and Dean of Ravenclaw, popped up behind a pile of volumes. He was reputed to have been a dueling champion in his youth and had an energetic, high-pitched voice that didn't fail to command attention. When he called Neville's name, he got so excited he toppled off his stack of books. "All right," Flitwick said, his voice trilling. "Turn to the first chapter of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. Let's talk briefly about the principles of magic." He outlined a simple, common understanding. Magic was made of spirit and will. Magic was the thread, and will the loom. You could only weave one with the other. Wands, gestures, and incantations were tools to help a wizard marshal spirit and focus the mind. Powerful wizards sometimes developed spells from a need or instinct and then codified the gestures and words other wizards copied. Their first spell was the Lumos charm. "Who knows the incantation for Lumos?" Flitwick asked. Ted's hand shot up. "Lumos. Very good. Perfect pronunciation. Ravenclaw gets 2 points." Quest triggered. Good student. Goal: accurately answer 100 questions from school professors. Progress: 1/100. Reward: 500 experience, random card. No time limit. Good. Ted glanced sideways. Hermione's hand was up too. He had a single, strong rival. 25. Gain experience. Get a batch. Gain experience. Get a batch. Ding. You listened carefully to Professor Flitwick's explanation and gained a deeper understanding of the Lumos spell. Lumos gained 25 experience, and the experience pool gained 25 experience. LV1, 38/200. Ted had already self-taught Lumos. Of the 38 experience points, 25 came from the lecture and the other 13 from his own practice. Besides the skill level of a spell, Magic itself also has levels that represent your mastery and proficiency. If someone favored a particular kind of magic and practiced it obsessively, they could push that magic to a very high level. Soon it was time for practical application. Professor Flitwick told the class to try casting the spell. Ted, who had practiced Lumos on his first day holding a wand, cast it without hesitation. Flitwick was, as ever, generous to his own house. Very good. Mr. Epiphany has already cast it. What a beautiful light. 5 points to Ravenclaw. Ted grinned to himself. The head of house was generous. Hermione followed and cast Lumos too. Her light wasn't quite as strong or steady as Ted's, but it was perfectly acceptable. Good, Miss Granger has succeeded as well. 2 more points to Ravenclaw. Hermione couldn't help but puff out her cheeks. Why only 2 points? Ted mouthed an apology and a promise. Next year, it's all hers. The Slytherins nearby were predictably displeased, muttering that Professor Flitwick was stacking points for his own students. The afternoon's second class was herbology with Hufflepuff, held in Professor Sprout's greenhouse in the southeast wing of the castle. The greenhouse grew many magical plants and herbs, and Professor Sprout, short, plump, with a well-worn hat and robes dusted from years of toil, taught with gentle, flowing enthusiasm. Surrounded by living plants, the class was lively and warm. Ted answered an off-textbook question in the middle of class and earned 5 more points. Wonderful. Points added and questions answered. The day promised much. After classes and dinner, most of the new students made for the library. Students who skipped homework on the first day of term were rare. They'd had 3 classes and a stack of assignments to match. For most of his companions, the only way to finish was to go to the library to look things up and copy out theories. For Ted, it was no trouble. He didn't need to look anything up. He could write it straight from his head and meet the word count easily. It was just writing. Easy. Still, the Hogwarts library was worth visiting. A third of Hogwarts's value lay here. The largest, most complete collection of magical books in Britain, accumulated over centuries and bolstered by donations from accomplished alumni. No family or private institution could rival it. While his friends were still struggling, Ted finished his homework in just over 10 minutes. Ding! You conscientiously completed the homework assigned by the professor and gained something. Plus 15 experience. Counting lecture experience and that reward, Ted had gained a total of 75 experience points that day. A huge windfall. He casually picked up a book on transfiguration theory and started reading. Ding! Task triggered. The ladder of wizard progress. In this largest library in Great Britain, you are like a mouse that has fallen into a rice bin. What are you waiting for? Read it. Goal: read 100 books from the library's collection. Reward: 400 experience. Card: body strengthening manual. Train your mind before you train your body. As a wizard, you must have profound knowledge and a strong physique. Ted couldn't suppress a smile as he held Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration explained. For anyone else, this task would take years. For him, it was almost effortless. He could scan a book in minutes. Whether he fully understood it now or not could wait. The task only required reading, not mastery. His companions stared, unnerved by the abnormal smile on his face. Ron elbowed Jerry. Look at Ted! Jerry looked and saw Ted grinning like he'd lost his mind. Neville breathed, awestruck. No wonder Ted is amazing. Look how much he loves reading. Hermione bit her lip and promised herself she could work harder. Ted began to scan books, not read them in the usual way, but scan. His eyes moved like an electronic reader. His hands flicked pages without pause. The rest of the world seemed to vanish, his gaze fixed on lines of text. His whole spirit sunk into the books. Even Madame Pince, the librarian, frowned as she approached. Student, that's not how one reads a book. Ted looked up for the first time, smiled faintly, and recited a passage backward for her. Madame Pince left with a strange expression and then kept sneaking glances at him from across the room. His friends were even more flabbergasted. Is this really the same person who can recite backwards so fluently? They'd all come on the same train. How could such a talent gap exist? Ron had long since given up comparing himself. He hadn't been bested so often without being used to it. He stared at the parchment Ted had filled and tried to sound casual. Ted. Jerry and Harry hovered nearby, equally fascinated. Ted barely looked up. He pushed the homework sheet toward them. A clear message: don't disturb me while I'm on a task. He'd already skimmed and memorized 4 or 5 books at hand, but decided not to overdo it. Mental energy was still limited, and attempting to scan 100 books in one sitting wasn't realistic. Spreading it out over weeks made more sense. When his companions were still poring over their own assignments, Ted stood and strolled through the library. Hogwarts' library was enormous, 2 floors spanning thousands of square meters. Tall shelves reached to the high ceiling. Many books could only be reached with ladders. Lost in thought, Ted drifted to the protected rows, a dozen bookcases cordoned off with black ropes and warning signs, the restricted section. Here the air hummed with chaotic, immense magical currents. Many of the books were enchanted. This was a treasure within a treasure. Ding, task triggered. Restricted books are the essence of the library. The Hogwarts restricted section contains extremely precious and dangerous magic books, including ancient magics hundreds to thousands of years old and highly dangerous forbidden knowledge. You can't miss this. Goal: read 10 works from the restricted section. Reward: 800 experience, +1 dark arts, random card. Ted looked toward Madame Pince, then slowly walked away from the ropes. This was not the time. He had already thought through his situation before arriving at Hogwarts. He was not the boy who lived, no savior with a margin for error. He couldn't afford reckless mistakes. The main task of the first year was to build a foundation, absorb the knowledge the school allowed, and truly become part of the magical world, not to cause trouble by sneaking out at night, reading forbidden books, or trespassing into the forbidden forest. Those were invitations to disaster and possible expulsion. Even though one of the tasks tempted him, he couldn't rush into it. For now, his priority was learning magic properly. Only when his foundation was solid could he consider other pursuits. Chapter 26: Snape's Answers. The next morning, Ted woke up half an hour earlier than usual. The system had been right. A wizard needed more than spells and knowledge. He also needed physical strength. At a critical moment, you had to be able to act like Gandalf, swinging a staff sword to meet the enemy, or like a witcher, taking a hit and standing back up. If nothing else, being fit bought you options. He told Hermione they'd meet in the Great Hall that morning because he wanted to run. He had planned a lap around the Black Lake, but after standing at its edge, he abandoned the idea. Ansu would be the one to fly a lap. Ted would be eating lunch long before he finished one himself. A lap felt like more than 10 kilometers, maybe half a marathon. After 20 minutes of running left him gasping, Ted muttered "Accio" to himself. His 11-year-old body was still weak. He needed to get stronger. Still, he gained 3 experience points for the run, which was better than nothing. More importantly, he discovered a new mind power: mental encouragement. Regular runners know the body often isn't what stops you. The brain sets a limit. If you grit your teeth and push through, you can reach another stage. Ted figured out how to use his mind power to stimulate the brain and bypass those invisible self-restrictions. It came with risks. Overuse could silence the body's feedback, and if the body truly reached its limit with the brain's safeguards gone, you could collapse, so he would use it sparingly. The second day's classes were charms, history of magic, and herbology. He answered 3 questions across those lessons and earned 10 points. History of magic yielded nothing. The ghost professor Binns was the embodiment of laziness. He phased through walls and droned on, reciting without bothering to take attendance or set any questions. No chances to earn extra credit. Ted would have laughed if he'd had a professor like that in college. As a student now, he found it infuriating. Lying flat and doing nothing really did block every avenue of exploitation. Even a transmigrator with a system had no recourse. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, it was finally Snape's potions class. It was a single, long session once a week, with all 4 houses attending together. The classroom was in the basement, whether because a damp, cool cellar was good for storing ingredients or because it was convenient to Snape's office, no one could say. The room was cold and dim in a way no magic in the school could entirely counteract. Half of one wall was filled with glass jars holding parts of magical creatures, like a specimen room in a medical research institute. Ted had seen similar places back in his previous life during building renovations. cabinets and mummified remains strewn about as if theft were the last thing anyone worried about. It was the sort of atmosphere that put a chill in your bones. Hermione leaned over before class. "I heard Professor Snape never gives points to students from other houses," she whispered. Ted smirked inwardly. Doesn't give points? He hadn't met Ted yet. Even if Snape's heart were iron, his ancestors were blacksmiths, and Ted intended to test that iron for rust. Before class, he used Ravenclaw's wisdom, blue, to buff himself and settled in. Snape drifted into the room as silently as a bat, and the temperature seemed to dip several degrees. He scanned the students, his gaze lingering on Harry a beat longer than on the rest. He spoke softly and slowly, dripping contempt in every syllable. "You are here to learn the precise science and exact art of potion making," he said. "There is little foolish wand-waving here. You will not be told to wave your arms and expect results. I do not expect many of you to appreciate the beauty of the white smoke from a gently simmering cauldron, nor the subtle fragrance that drifts from a potion. You will not understand the power of a liquid that moves through the veins and alters the mind. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, provided you are not a pack of dunderheads." Ted grinned. Snape's words were proper, sharp, and perfectly put. Then came Snape's favorite part of a new term, the questioning. Like McGonagall, Snape enjoyed putting newcomers on the spot. He liked to pick one poor soul to flounder on his podium. It was never truly random, mainly whoever annoyed him most. This time, Harry wasn't his target, and Neville had long since fallen out of Snape's attention. Ted, who had been grinning at Snape's opening, drew a sharp look and became the chosen one. "Epiphany! Stand up!" Snape snapped. He launched into questions. "What would you have if you added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Ted replied smoothly, "A sleeping potion of considerable potency, the draught of living death." "If I told you to find a bezoar, where would you look?" "In the stomach of a goat." "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "There is none. They are the same plant, aconite." Snape adjusted his pace and raised the difficulty. "Why must leeches have their mucus removed and be air-dried before use?" Ted didn't hesitate. He knew the question from experience. Leech mucus is often a cheap filler and can contaminate potions. Stripping it off and air-drying the leeches both improves the quality of the ingredient and increases their market value. Using leeches without proper cleaning can negatively affect many mixtures. Snape blinked. That answer was practical, not textbook, knowledge gained in practice rather than in class. He tried another. "What must you remember when collecting leaping toadstools?" "Do not harvest the stem," Ted said. "The stem is highly toxic and strongly hallucinogenic. If it gets into a potion, it can be lethal." "And common lacewing flies, where would you find them?" "In dark bushes, rich with residual magic." Ted rattled off 5 or 6 more, and the other students watched in stunned silence as he parried question after question. Finally, he encountered one he couldn't answer. Snape narrowed his eyes and curled his lip in disdain. "I thought you knew everything and didn't need this class," he said, then snapped at the room. "Write this down. What are you waiting for? Do any of you actually understand what I have just said?" The class scurried to copy notes. Ted scowled inwardly. Snape hadn't given a single point. His heart, he decided, wasn't just iron. It was black, rustless iron. Snape, on the other hand, had to preserve his pride. If he'd asked for the recipe for Felix Felicis, Ted would have been stumped. Snape had to craft questions that were both obscure and basic, and this time he'd been caught off guard. After the interrogation, Snape went on to explain the lesson for the day, the theory, tools, and the method for brewing a boil-curing potion that treated many skin ailments. Potions required hands-on work, so after nearly an hour of instruction, he let the students begin. Cauldrons, stirring rods, mortars and pestles, scales, silver knives, all were neatly arranged. For some students, the sight of a sharp silver blade was like a scalpel pointed at themselves. Ted's system pinged. "Ding, mission triggered, the young wizard's first potion. Snape has shown you the method and key points for brewing a boil-curing potion. Prepare your first potion. Goal, complete the preparation of your first potion. Reward, 200 experience. Card, Neville's failed boil-curing potion. Deep feelings, 1 gulp down. Finish this cup. There are 3 more." Even if Snape was stingy with points, the mission at least offered a reward. Ted set to work, cutting herbs, weighing, heating the cauldron, adding oil, frying until the pieces were golden. The aroma that rose made even Malfoy at the next table look envious. Brewing a potion properly starts with handling the ingredients correctly. The quality of the ingredients and the way you treat them will directly affect the potion's effectiveness. First, place 6 pieces of snake fang in a mortar and grind them into powder. This step must be meticulous. If there are large particles, the finished potion will be cloudy and nearly useless. Using pure water as the base, add the snake fang powder and 4 portions of dried nettles to the cauldron and heat gently for 10 seconds to coax the medicinal properties into reacting. Then wave your wand, infuse the mixture with magic, and wait patiently for the reaction to finish. The amount of magic, the length of waiting, and even the intention behind the infusion all matter. Once the solvent turns a faint blue, add 4 boiled horned slugs to the cauldron. They should dissolve after 5 seconds. Remove the cauldron from the fire, then add 2 whole porcupine quills. After the quills melt, wave your wand again, stir 5 times clockwise, and when the color turns light green, it's done. Ted and Hermione's potion was going smoothly. By the color, it was nearly perfect. After all, Ted was considered half competent at this point. A little chime sounded in his head. Ding! Mission Young Wizard's first potion, completed. Gain 200 experience. Card, Neville's failed scabies potion, green. Item card, Neville's failed scabies potion. When thrown, it causes all targets within a 5-meter radius of the impact point to itch profusely and break out in scabies-like bumps. One-time use. Note, do not throw on allies. A one-time use item card popped into Ted's inventory. The effect wasn't overwhelming, but the area of effect was wide. The potion instructions had been precise, ingredient amounts and timings down to the second, so following them shouldn't have been a problem. Then, pang, Seamus's cauldron exploded. A few younger wizards nearby were affected. Seamus himself had a soot-blackened face and 2 angry red boils blooming on his nose. Snape went livid. If his skull hadn't been so thick, the man's blood pressure would have ruptured something. Foolish! Are you brewing an alchemical explosive potion? How do you manage to blow up a scabies potion, huh? He barked, practically flying around the dungeon as he dealt with the mess. Neville, who was nearby, immediately panicked. He stammered and grew clumsier the more nervous he became, nearly throwing ingredients into the cauldron at random. Ted grabbed his wrist. "You can't add porcupine quills while the cauldron is still heating," he hissed. In the original story, Neville had made precisely that mistake. He destroyed his cauldron and ended up covered in boils and bumps. Neville set the quills down with trembling hands. "Thank you, Ted," he mumbled. Snape, however, couldn't stand to see anyone openly help another. "Ha! Does our Mr. Epiphany think he can already teach others? How arrogant!" He leaned in for the kill. "Interfering with another's potion brewing. Ravenclaw, 5 points from you." Ted's heart did a small, traitorous flip. Snape loved deducting points. If he took them, maybe the mission would still count. Ted tried to defend himself quickly. "Professor, I'm not trying to teach. I was just stopping Neville from burning through his cauldron." Snape smiled with pure contempt. "So you understand the consequences of such foolishness. Contradicting a professor. Another 5 points!" Ted inwardly cheered. Snape was handing out penalties like candy. Neville finally tried to protest. "No, it wasn't Ted. It was me. I." But Snape leveled him with a look, and Neville swallowed his words. "Ha, Longbottom, the boy who lived. What is it you want to say? Will you thank your friend with this pot of poison? Do my words go in one ear and out the other because you listen to Epiphany instead? Not paying attention in class. Gryffindor, 5 points." The torrent of venom left Neville in tears. At that moment, Malfoy found his opening and sneered. "Ha, a fluke boy who lived. What a crybaby." Snape pretended not to hear the remark. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the others glared at the professor and the sneering Slytherin with all the fury they could muster. Class ended, and Snape drifted off like a large, malevolent bat, clutching his notes as if they were precious. The Malfoy trio laughed loudly as they glanced back at Ted and his friends, pleased with themselves. Harry, Hermione, and the others rushed to defend Ted and Neville. Sirius was right. Snape is vicious. He didn't even come close to describing how bad Snape is, Harry said indignantly. Hermione, indignant in her own right, despised how Snape never added points for correct answers, but delighted in subtracting them. Ron and Jerry quietly muttered that Professor Snape would go bald from getting his own way. Neville sobbed quietly, and Ted patted his shoulder. Neville, the world won't be kind just because you cry. Don't show weakness to others, except family and close friends. He offered a smile. But if you're really upset, we'll listen. If one day one of us cries, you'll be the one to comfort us, right? Neville wiped his eyes and nodded. It had been a rough class for him. Ted had done well with the potion, but fine, he'd lost points instead of gained them. 10 points just evaporated, courtesy of Snape. It was as if one pot of Snape's temper was worth several professors' authority. Ted did notice something odd, though. Snape wasn't targeting Harry as openly as he used to. It felt strange. Snape seemed to be paying a lot more attention to Harry, but not attacking him directly. Instead, some of that attention had begun to land on Harry's friends, Ted, Ron, and others who whispered in class. The targeting hadn't disappeared, it had shifted. That night, Ted went to bed late because they had astronomy class in the middle of the night. Astronomy was held in the highest tower of the castle. Just climbing the winding staircase made some students feel dizzy. Professor Aurora Sinistra taught astronomy, a woman who didn't seem very old and had a calm, unobtrusive presence. Ted's second-hand telescope finally proved useful. Although it was certainly second-hand, images were fuzzy. He ended up borrowing Hermione's telescope to get a clear look. Climbing a tower in the middle of the night to look at the stars might sound romantic to some, but wizards didn't study astronomy to build rockets. Both muggles and wizards had long been fascinated by the heavens, and celestial bodies possess powerful magic. Wizards have observed their movements and used them for a long time in ritual magic, which is deep and rarely taught at school. Ritual magic can produce astonishing results with very little raw power because it works by harmonizing with natural forces. Timing is everything. Ancient rituals often require precise astronomical conditions, planetary alignments, lunar or solar eclipses, comets, and so on. Many human festivals grew out of these times of power: Halloween, Easter, Christmas, though their original meanings have been lost or reshaped over millennia. For Ted, this was arcane material, far beyond what he needed right now. For the moment, textbook knowledge was enough. In the blink of an eye, it was Thursday. That afternoon was their first Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson with the Gryffindors. The younger students had high hopes for it. Transfiguration was abstruse and difficult, making homework a nightmare. Charms had only taught Lumos so far, and they were still repeating simple spells. Herbology was interesting, but left them filthy and exhausted, and occasionally dangerous. History of magic was practically a nap class. In potions, Snape had already called everyone idiots. That left Defense Against the Dark Arts and Flying as the two classes the students most looked forward to. If they were honest, most of them would be disappointed. "Don't get your hopes up," Harry said with a helpless shrug. "I heard from a Hufflepuff that Professor Quirrell's teaching is only marginally better than Professor Binns's." Harry had long since shed any trace of the old, lonely outsider. She was practically a Hogwarts socialite now. From 5th and 6th years down through all 4 houses, she knew people everywhere. That was how she'd learned about Quirrell's reputation. A Hufflepuff in class the day before had mentioned it in passing. Everyone gasped when they heard it, only slightly better than Professor Binns, the monotone relic of history of magic. How awful. Ron leaned in and whispered, "George and Fred say the Defense Against the Dark Arts job is jinxed." His words hooked everyone. Jerry peppered him with questions while Neville and Harry crowded closer, eager for gossip. Seeing how popular his scoop was, Ron puffed up a little and went on. "I heard the Defense Against the Dark Arts post has changed hands every year for about 30 years. Nobody lasts a second year. Accidents, breakdowns, people resign or they're forced to stop teaching. Some even end up in St. Mungo's. They say there's a curse." At the word curse, the corridor exploded with chatter. Some students even started betting whether Quirrell would be back next year. Hermione, skeptical, asked Ted quietly, "Is what Ron says true?" "It's not in a history of Hogwarts." Ted chuckled. "Just because it's not in a book doesn't mean it isn't true. And not everything in books is true. Use your head. And yes, what Ron said is true. Ask any older student who's been here a few years. He explained, for as long as anyone could remember, the Defense Against the Dark Arts post had been cursed in practice, if not in name. A new professor every year, often driven away by a scandal, a calamity, or sudden incapacity. Sometimes it was resignation, sometimes it was madness or injury. The result, the job became infamous and difficult to fill. Class started soon after. Professor Quirrell shuffled in, a purple turban wrapped round his head, a peculiar smell about him, shifty eyes, and a stooped, timid manner. "Hello, everyone. I am Professor Quirrell, your Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher," he stammered. His appearance and his stutter sank everyone's expectations. Harry mimicked him under her breath. "Hello, my name is Quirrell." The mimicry didn't help. Quirrell's performance was a little overdone, too timid, too theatrical. This wasn't his first day at Hogwarts, though. He had been the Muggle Studies professor before, until he took leave to travel abroad. He'd spent time in the Black Forest in Albania, the very place Lord Voldemort had been lying low for 9 years. It was in those travels, rumor said, that Quirrell brought Voldemort back to Britain. Fate, it seemed, played its part. Quirrell's transfer from Muggle Studies to Defense Against the Dark Arts looked like it had been insisted on by the thing that now inhabited him. A professor who constantly preached pure-blood superiority couldn't be trusted teaching Muggle studies. Too embarrassing. Voldemort himself had long wanted the Defense Against the Dark Arts chair. Supposedly he had been turned down by Armando Dippet and Dumbledore and had cursed the position in revenge. Now, possessing Quirrell, he could finally occupy the role he'd coveted. A long-standing desire, at last realized. For the record, Quirrell's full name was Quirinus Quirrell. Quirinus, being an obscure Roman god associated with war, made the name feel faintly ominous. Maybe Quirrell wasn't quite as meek as he looked. The first lesson was on how to deal with ghouls. Not the same ghouls Ted thought of. These were a species of magical creature rather than undead scavengers. Wizarding ghouls liked attics and barns, eating insects and mice. They could be noisy and annoying, but not especially dangerous. Some wizarding families even considered a ghoul in the house good luck and treated it almost like a pet. Vocabulary in the magical world was messy. Different creatures got lumped under the same name over the years, and the books hadn't caught up yet. Defense Against the Dark Arts, Ted reminded them, focused largely on dangerous magical creatures. Quentin Trimble's A Guide to Self-Protection Against the Dark Arts, the set text, was mostly a compendium of how to prevent and handle encounters with such creatures. In practice, the class was less how to perform dark magic and more how to protect yourself from it, a bit like a criminal law course that teaches sentencing and procedure rather than encouraging crimes. Quirrell read straight from the textbook for the whole period. When class ended, students clustered in the corridor, complaining that Quirrell was unreliable and that the whole Defense Against the Dark Arts course was doomed. Neville kept quiet. He actually quite liked Quirrell and felt a kinship with him. As time went on, the halo that had once surrounded the boy who lived began to fade in the eyes of many classmates, and they started to notice that Neville was, well, ordinary. He was still timid and clumsy, and that drew criticism. Malfoy was merciless in stirring it up. Ron, Jerry, and Harry stayed friends with Neville and defended him when it mattered, but they admitted privately that he wasn't the most talented student. Hermione, half believing and half disbelieving the complaint about Quirrell, asked Ted in a worried tone, "Is he nervous? Is this his first time teaching?" "He's taught here before, Muggle Studies," Ted said. "He was a Ravenclaw once, and people said he was very capable. Something happened on a holiday, though. I heard he had a run-in with a vampire in Africa. Maybe he came back with what looks like PTSD." Hermione's disappointment showed. The thought of 7 years of Defense Against the Dark Arts being like this was discouraging. Ted shrugged. "Still, it's better than Lockhart. Quirrell has real theoretical knowledge and experience. He's just hard to take seriously. He's awkward. But he did answer questions and we got 5 points. It's a shame no tasks triggered. Don't worry, it's only for a year at most." "Because of the curse?" Hermione asked. "Yes, no one lasts more than a year in that post. Ask the older students. The class changes teachers every year, and the curriculum never properly progresses. Can't Dumbledore lift it? Neville pressed. Apparently not, Ted said. If he could, he would have done it. They keep having to recruit a new professor every year. If you don't know the history, you might think Hogwarts is sacrificing them. When you thought about it, it did sound grim. Besides Quirrell and Lockhart, a few professors had gone mad or met tragic ends during their tenure. Professors like Lupin, Moody, and Snape had at least survived their single years at the time, only to meet their fates later on in the story of the school. The curse on the post had a way of catching up with those who touched it. Even Lord Voldemort, it was sometimes joked, hadn't been immune. Ted launched into a ridiculous aside about Voldemort's unlucky years. He'd been born in 1926, the year of the tiger, and the final battle in 1998 fell on his zodiac year. Numerologically, ages 73 and 84 were critical. Harry's birth year made them zodiacally incompatible, and if you were up for superstitions, the left side allegedly lost duels anyway. It was nonsense, but it cheered some of them up. One more odd bit of trivia circulated in whisper and rumor. Harry and Voldemort were distant relations. Harry was said to descend from the youngest of the three brothers in the tales of Beedle the Bard, the one who owned the invisibility cloak, while Voldemort came from the line of the second brother who had the resurrection stone. Britain's pure-blood families had intermarried for centuries. Trace back 5 generations, and you'd find more connections than you expected. Chapter 29, First Flying Lesson Battle. They'd been in Defense Against the Dark Arts class, but there was one question Ted still couldn't make sense of. How do you define the dark arts? It was always vague. You could say it's hard to pin down, like asking someone to define pornography. You might not be able to put it into words, but show them an image, and they'll know. Still, the dark arts have some common features. First, they usually require harming others to work. Second, they often cause severe injury. Think of a basilisk's gaze or a sectum sempra wound that's like an invisible blade and hard to heal. Third, using the dark arts often means harboring great malice and dark intent, most obviously with the unforgivable curses. Fourth, why do ordinary students sometimes only get a nosebleed when they try Avada Kedavra? Partly because their magic is weak, but also because they lack the necessary hatred. Wizards' will and intent shape magic. Magic sets the initial effect, but will determines the final result. Between dark arts and white magic, there's a gray area, curses and jinxes. In Harry's world, the classification runs jinxes, hexes, and curses. Jinxes are light, prankish spells like the Leglocker curse. Hexes are nastier, Hermione's boil spell that disfigured Marietta, or Ron's slug vomiting charm. And strictly speaking, spells like Diffindo, the exploding charm, or Incendio can all be lethal, so where to draw the line? Friday morning's first class was flying, shared with Hufflepuff, and there were no afternoon lessons, so the kids had the afternoon off. Madam Hooch taught the class, and the school's broomsticks looked like old worn-out things, bald brooms no one would pick up if they'd been left on the road. The lesson went smoothly. Humans have longed to fly since ancient times, and that yearning shows. Everyone clings to the idea of getting into the air. Ted was no exception. He was a little excited, and Hermione was even more so. She'd read several books on flying theory the night before. Both of them were Muggle-born and had never handled anything like this. Compared to Ted, Hermione was less lucky. Ted summoned his broom to his hand on the first try. Hermione's broom lay on the ground, lazy and rolling, refusing to fly into her hand. Ted wasn't surprised. He'd always thought of Hermione as a theoretical overachiever who wasn't great at practical stuff. Flying was all practice. Ted floated 1/2 meter above the ground, hovering near Hermione and guiding her patiently. "Hermione, don't hesitate," he told her. "Don't worry that the broom won't respond. Don't worry about flying. Your will has to be firm and steady. You can't be half-hearted. The broom answers to confidence." "It's not alive," Hermione muttered. "It's a tool. It senses your magic. Tell it to fly into your hand." Ted completed a task in flying class. Flying. Gained 100 experience. After Ted and his friends practiced, it was Harry and Neville's turn. Ron, predictably, started boasting, "I was playing with toy brooms before I could crawl." But Harry didn't care about bragging. He simply wasn't interested in broom flying. He hadn't inherited any of his father James's flying genes, much to Sirius's regret. Malfoy, not far away, was boasting even more wildly, claiming that when he was 8 or 9, he'd flown close to a Muggle helicopter and made it wobble. Bragging about that sort of thing was risky. If a broom got too close to a helicopter, the broom would probably be shredded by the rotor wash. Of the 4 Gryffindor friends, only Ron was truly eager. Harry was indifferent. Neville had barely touched a broom since childhood. Jerry had never even seen one before Diagon Alley. Harry took to his broom instantly. His talent showed, and the broom obeyed. Jerry's and Neville's brooms were stubborn. Jerry slipped his up when no one was looking, and Neville, seeing that, blushed and picked his up too. But Neville was so nervous during the test flight that when he pushed off the ground, he shot straight up with a whoosh, higher and higher. The broom seemed to shout, "I want to fly higher! Higher! Fly to the sky and stand shoulder to shoulder with the sun." When Neville reached about 20 meters, he panicked and let go. If he'd kept going, he might never have been found, but luckily, Madame Hooch caught him with a cushioning charm. He might not have died, but without it, he could have been seriously hurt. After comforting Neville, Madame Hooch hurried off to retrieve the broom, which had become free and couldn't simply be allowed to fly away. It was school property, after all. But as soon as she left, the class began to run wild. 11 and 12-year-olds get restless fast. Those who could fly took to the air. Those who couldn't or didn't care stood around leaning on brooms and chatting. Then Malfoy, who had been mocking Neville, found a small glass ball on the ground. It was Neville's Remembrall. "Ha! Look what I've found. Longbottom's Remembrall. Good thing he didn't die." Malfoy crowed, waving it and inviting laughter from the Slytherins. Harry rushed forward and snatched the Remembrall from Malfoy. "Malfoy, is your family so poor you have to steal other people's things?" he shouted like an enraged lion. Malfoy froze. He'd been picked on by Harry since childhood, and the sudden shout left him stunned. But his 2 cronies were quicker to react and lunged forward. Ron and the others couldn't just stand aside. "What do you think you're doing?" Someone yelled, and pushing began. No one could say who started it, but an ouch turned the shoving into a full brawl between Gryffindor and Slytherin. It became known as the First Flying Lesson War. At least 5 or 6 students ended up with bruises or black eyes. Almost all the boys were covered in mud, and a few girls joined in too. On Gryffindor's side, Harry fought like a one-man force, taking on Malfoy and his 2 followers, like a war goddess. On Slytherin's side, Millicent Bulstrode, the girl nicknamed the Ogress for her bulk and astonishing strength, was a formidable fighter, with arms like draft horses and fists that could floor people. Neville was trembling after the fight, but he'd been brave and his friends noticed. Ron threw himself in most recklessly, diving into the scrum and getting roughed up for his trouble. He came away with several footprints on his backside. Jerry, meanwhile, was good at sneaking up from behind and tripping people. Half of Slytherin's mud-splattered state was thanks to him. He was also one of the few Gryffindors to leave the fight largely unscathed. By dinner, everyone at school had heard about the brawl. From a distance, Ted and his friends could hear Ron still boasting. "I went in, sneaked up, Pia, a right roundhouse, Pia, a left front kick, Pia, a 5-hit combo." Later, the friends recapped the fight. Ron complained, "What were you lot doing when I went in? I got knocked down and you just... What, did you go in after me?" Harry and the others replied, "They beat you down. We had to get you back." Ron pointed out that they hadn't gone in sooner. "So what were your tactics?" he asked. Their answer, "Sell you out." They all laughed, because that was the kind of ridiculous thing friends say after a scrappy, muddy brawl. Both houses were punished, 50 points docked from each, but they weren't given detention. There were too many students involved, and the school couldn't reasonably punish the entire lot. "If this keeps up," Ted said, "Ravenclaw might actually have a chance at the House Cup." Ding. Thanks to reader Deceased Old Shia for the 1,000 reward. Thank you. 30. Battle in the middle of the night. Ding. Quest triggered. We are the champions. The last time Ravenclaw won the House Cup was before Snape started teaching. Can you just stand by and do nothing? Let's go, brothers. Objective. Help Ravenclaw win the House Cup. Reward 1,300 EXP plus 1 intelligence, random card. The last time Ravenclaw won the House Cup felt like forever ago. Damn it, you're messing with me. Ted stared, stunned. With Dumbledore a Gryffindor, did anyone else even stand a chance at the cup? Hermione looked up. What's wrong? Oh, nothing. I'm just happy for Harry and Ron, Ted said. Happy? You're happy after losing 50 points? Hermione's eyebrows shot up. Points were practically her lifeblood. Ted scrambled to explain. Think about it. They all lost points, right? Doesn't that give Ravenclaw a chance to win the House Cup now? Is that really okay? Hermione cracked a reluctant smile. All right, stop holding back. We don't want that thing. Harry banged the table. Exactly, Ron agreed. Jerry the mouse, shrugged. I'm fine with anything, Neville admitted quietly. Actually, I sort of wanted it. I just didn't dare say. Hermione burst out laughing, and the great hall filled with cheerful noise. Malfoy was mortified. Being beaten by a girl in public had bruised his pride, but the worst thing from his point of view was being humiliated and then not doing anything about it. He couldn't face a fair duel. He wasn't confident he could win, and the humiliation had left a shadow in his heart. So he targeted what he thought the easiest. He picked a fight with two boys who would make easier prey. That night, when corridors were quiet, Malfoy stepped out and intercepted Neville and Ron. Longbottom, Weasley, he sneered. If you're real men, don't hide behind girls. Tonight at 11:30, third floor corridor, I'll bring one companion and face the two of you. A proper wizard's duel, not muggles throwing punches. Do you dare? Neville flushed. Before he could answer, Ron had already puffed up. Ha! 2 versus 2. Anyone who chickens out is a coward. Jerry piped up, squeaking. What about me? Don't ignore me. Harry couldn't not know about this. Ron tried to act macho, but Harry saw through him at once. After a little interrogation, Neville stayed silent. Jerry confessed as if he'd been under a truth spell, and Ron stomped around, pretending indignant. Harry grinned. Come here. I have a plan. The Gryffindor Four hatched a scheme to teach Malfoy a lesson. Deliver a proper Gryffindor dressing down. Earlier in the year, Sirius had given Harry the family invisibility cloak, but 4 people couldn't fit under it. Fortunately, Jerry's natural stealth was exceptional. He could pad along walls without a sound. Perfect. Harry and 2 others went under the cloak while Jerry trailed behind, scuttling like an actual mouse. Predictably, the old schemer lost to the trickster. Malfoy stood them up. The 4 waited in the cold corridor for half an hour, nearly getting caught by Filch. They ran and ran before finally slipping back to safety. Their first night out was a disaster. They didn't even make it to breakfast the next morning. Ted and Hermione worried something had happened. At lunch, they met up and explained how they'd been stood up. Harry was incandescent. He wanted to hex Malfoy on sight, but after the big fight during the first flying class, another public eruption would only make matters worse. Ted offered a practical solution. Spread the word. No, tell the truth. Tell your friends Malfoy's a coward. He didn't show up for the duel. He's disgraced Slytherin's honor. Some say he even admitted he's a coward. To Slytherins, betrayal might not sting the way we think, but being called a coward, being declared unworthy of Slytherin, was a grave insult. The older Slytherins, like old Lucius types who cared about money more than face, might shrug, but the younger ones cared about reputation. The rumors spread like wildfire. Harry had a wide social network. The story traveled fast. Malfoy seethed and begged to be allowed to duel, but everyone smiled at him and pretended not to hear him. When he walked by people, whispered that he was a coward. The rumor even ballooned that Malfoy shivered in his bed at night, had written begging his father to pull him out of Hogwarts. After that, even some Slytherins looked at him oddly. Children were easily influenced by group opinion. Malfoy felt cornered. He seriously thought of writing to his father to pour out his grievances. The second Saturday rolled around. The first weekend of school had been mostly homework and catching up. Students slept in, spent time in the library, played wizard's chess, or chatted in the Great Hall. Ted, who ran every morning, still got up early. Some kids needed their sleep. Hermione had tried to run with Ted, but dozed off in class on the 3rd day and gave up. As for homework, Harry and Ron had found a favorite technique: padding. Pages and pages of fluff. Ted looked at one of their assignments, 5 pages of writing with scarcely a useful sentence, and sighed. It read like official gobbledygook, They could probably find work at the ministry with that talent. With everyone more settled in the castle, curiosity and restlessness grew. One morning, as Ansu flew near the Great Hall, Harry called out, "Ansu, where are you going?" Ansu landed on a lampshade and cawed, "Caw, cow, to the kitchens for fries." In 2 weeks, the bird had found the Hogwarts kitchens and made friends with the house elves. She got special treats and was a social creature already. "Don't eat yet. Quick, fetch Ted and Hermione. There's something fun." Ansu flew off to fetch them. When Ted and Hermione arrived, Harry led them to the second left tower's third-floor landing, where over a dozen younger students were already gathered. Ted spotted 3 boys with red hair, Ron and his twin brothers. "What's going on?" Ted asked. "These stairs change," Ron said eagerly. Hermione snorted. "Half the stairs in this castle change. What's so special?" George Weasley stepped forward. Even though he and Fred were identical, Ted could tell them apart. A mind mage notices subtle differences. George grinned. "It's not the usual change. Just watch." He climbed the steps, and when he reached the 13th stair, there was a click. The steps shifted, flattening into a slope. The whole staircase rotated so the risers became an inclined plane, and George shot down with a whoosh. The gathered kids cheered. "My turn! My turn!" they shouted and scrambled up as the stairs reset. Ted and Hermione exchanged a look. Watching Harry, Neville, Ron, and the others gleefully sliding and racing, both felt a small question linger. Was that it? Didn't the wizarding world have proper slides? Later that morning, after his run, Ted saw something stranger, a suit of armor humming tunelessly. Its neighbors looked annoyed. The humming paused, then resumed, and the 2 armors on either side finally lost patience. They marched over and each knocked the singing suit to pieces, metal crashing on stone. Ted ran off before Filch could see and accuse him of mischief. Curiosity won out. Ted started studying the moving armors around the castle. He knew about moving portraits from books and the original stories, but little had been said about animated armor. Through observation, he found they weren't all the same. Some armors were purely decorative, ceremonial sets or trophies. One had been made to fit a house elf in a vain wizard's idea of protecting him. The elf apparated the moment it was put on and never returned. Others were on strict schedules, rule-based armors that moved to certain places at certain times, patrols on a cycle of hours or days. And finally, a handful were highly autonomous, almost like portraits with free will. The humming suit and its 2 violent companions fell into this category. They were rare, but their freedom of action was striking. Ted's observations added another layer to the castle's odd living architecture. Hogwarts kept revealing little wonders and mischief around every corner. Chapter 31, Body Strengthening Manual, Blue, and a Bite of the Middle Ages. Ted had a mischievous streak, and when the mood struck him, he loved to put on a show. After class, taking advantage of the gathered crowd, he politely asked a suit of armor for directions. Quietly channeling his magic, he made the armor point a finger. "Oh, so it's over there. Got it, thanks," he said, looking enlightened, and walked off in the direction the armor indicated. The scene completely fooled the first years. A group of little wizards clustered around the armor and asked it questions for half an hour without a single reply. Some of them came to Ted for advice. He explained with a straight face, "You have to be polite, sincere, and ask from the bottom of your heart." By the next day, the armor was covered with offerings, trinkets, necklaces, even cloaks and scarves. A group of little wizards had shown their sincerity. Eventually, Filch, thoroughly annoyed, carted the armor away, and that was the end of it. The little wizards panicked when the armor disappeared. Ted sighed and said, "There were just too many of you. The armor got annoyed by your questions and walked away." The first years finally understood and regretted their behavior. Ted grinned inwardly. It was fun to trick first years. When the Weasley twins heard about the prank, they immediately declared Ted a master of mischief and tried to recruit him into the prank group they insisted on forming on the spot. Ted feigned shock. "Are you kidding? You're already on Dumbledore's watch list. How could I, a model student, stoop to your level and disappoint the professors? But if it's behind-the-scenes consulting, that's a different story." After 2 weeks at Hogwarts, the little wizards had settled in. Ron had devoured dozens of chicken legs, Jerry polished off several bowls of cheese, and Ansu never stopped snacking on fries. Neville earned Professor Sprout's appreciation in herbology. He found both a passion and a talent for it, and often helped out in the greenhouses in his free time. Hermione had already begun studying several subjects on her own, and with Ted's help, had learned a few spells ahead of schedule. Harry, under the house invisibility cloak, started to reenact the nocturnal adventures their father had once taken. On Monday of the third week, Harry announced she knew what lay behind the door on the right side of the third-floor corridor. Behind it is a giant Cerberus, a claim that made her friends roll their eyes at her restless imagination. Ted, meanwhile, had been buried in the library, finishing his reading task and copying texts. Then, ding, task, Wizard's Ladder of Progress. Completed. Reward obtained, 400 experience, item card, body strengthening manual, blue. Item card. This manual records secrets of health, diet, and exercise bound with magic. Train according to its instructions for 3 days and gain +2 constitution. Uses 1-1. Ted had never seen a one-time use item card like this before. When he activated it, the card transformed into a blue patterned booklet full of dietary and fitness knowledge. After memorizing its contents, he started following the exercises, cutting back on library time and practicing physical training alongside his magic. Hermione scoffed. "Are you going to give up your wand and fight with your fists now?" Ted just smiled. "A strong body is capital. You'll understand someday." While Ted trained with the manual, Harry and her friends were up to mischief again. That night, Harry challenged Malfoy to a duel with one simple rule. Whoever didn't show was a coward. Malfoy had been seething for weeks and jumped at the chance to restore his reputation. They chose the corridor on the right side of the third floor. When Malfoy and his two cronies pushed open the door in the middle of the night, they came face to face with a truck-sized Cerberus, slobbering and staring at them. Malfoy froze. "It's a hallucination. It's all a hallucination," he muttered, but his knees went to jelly and his robes trembled. Crabbe and Goyle, after a few stunned seconds, fell to the floor with a thud and scrambled away, howling like pigs down the corridor, which of course attracted Filch. Slytherin lost 30 points. Malfoy and his cronies, along with Harry for initiating the fight, were given detention. Malfoy's group got the full Filch treatment, cleaning toilets. Harry was hauled off to Snape, ostensibly to help with potions. Ted had pictured disgusting tasks involving slugs or dissecting magical creature organs. Instead, detention with Snape meant weighing potion ingredients on a scale and packaging them. If that was Snape's idea of a punishment, it was softer than anyone had expected. Snape remained as cold and terse as ever, but the work itself was hardly cruel. Ted imagined how different it might have been if he hadn't deliberately called Snape's attention in his first class. In potions, Snape had asked, "Harry, where would I find a bezoar?" Harry had pleaded ignorance, and Snape had rewarded honest answers with 5 points for Gryffindor. Ted completed the 3-day regimen in the body strengthening manual and gained a +2 constitution. The booklet dissolved into a blue glow and vanished. On September 19th, Hermione woke in the dormitory to find Ansu flying in through the window with a copy of Aesop's Fables and a note from Ted. Hermione unfolded the note. "Happy birthday." It was Hermione's birthday. She was born in 1979, and because her birthday falls after September 1st, she had started school a year later than some of her classmates. She beamed at the book and was clearly delighted. Her owl arrived shortly after, with letters and presents from her parents. Nearly 20 days at Hogwarts had had an effect on Hermione. Before this, she had been all study and very little else, but now she felt a little homesick and aware of how much she'd gained. She had made friends and wasn't lonely. 20 days could already feel like many years of friendship. Neville frequently sought Ted's advice and comfort, and that steady support moved him deeply. He loved school and his friends in a way he never had before, and even mused that, if he ever had children, he'd put them in a Muggle primary school first and send them to Hogwarts at 11. Under Ted's suggestion, Neville started keeping a diary to record daily events and thoughts. Unlike some of his classmates, Neville loved herbology, defense against the dark arts, and history of magic. He adored Professor Sprout and looked forward to herbology every time he checked the timetable. Quirrell's nervous, stammering style and defense against the dark arts made the class oddly endearing. Neville felt he could sympathize with a future professor who might be nervous. History of Magic, taught by the dozing Professor Binns, was a welcome, worry-free respite. The 20 days had brought growth for everyone. Neville was steadier and more confident. Ron was no longer just the overlooked youngest child at home. He had friends. Jerry had stopped being an outcast of his tribe and had become a wizard whom his people would be proud of, and his friends didn't care about his ears and tail. Harry finally had playmates and wasn't alone in the huge black family home. Hermione was slowly integrating into the magical world and learning more than just facts from Ted. At dinner, the friends learned it was Hermione's birthday and offered their congratulations. Ted led a rousing, if off-key, rendition of Happy Birthday. Harry and the others had never heard the Muggle birthday song before, and their singing was certainly enthusiastic. Hermione was thrilled. Even without her parents there, she had friends. Ansu kept sneaking fries and soon found herself unable to fly from overeating. Ted captivated the gathered students with tales of medieval Muggle dining from a book he'd read called The Shepherd's Calendar. He spun the story as if he had transmigrated into a medieval chef in a tale titled A Bite of the Middle Ages, battling wolves, rescuing the poor, confronting wicked servants and their disgraced masters, attracting an earl's daughter with sublime cuisine, and rising into nobility. His vivid descriptions of peculiar dishes and fabled feasts made mouths water. The little wizards were hooked, begging for more, already imagining subscriptions and bestseller lists. Even a Hufflepuff at the next table, ears pricked forward, sighed. "Why weren't you sorted into Hufflepuff? This isn't right." Ted realized, with a fond shrug, why the Sorting Hat had considered Hufflepuff for him. The fit made sense. Thanks to reader Yuan Yuan Ya for the 500 reward. Thanks to reader Tale number 1635 for the 100 reward. Thank you both. Chapter 32, Hagrid's Invitation. Ted had learned how to make matches look like pins. They would appear to be steel needles. But the change was only superficial. The material itself hadn't actually become metal. Transfiguration was proving to be as complex and exacting as everyone had warned. Ted had managed to learn 3 spells on his own in a week, but now that Professor McGonagall was teaching him transfiguration properly, his progress had slowed. Still, he was the fastest improver among the 36 first years. McGonagall had praised him 5 times in a few lessons, and Hermione 3 times. This was nothing like the simplified transfiguration in books and films. Transfiguration didn't work like independent spells. It was about an underlying skill. Once you truly mastered transforming one thing into something else, many similar transformations became possible. If you could turn a match into a needle, you had essentially learned the principles that would let you change parchment into silk or a ceramic plate into metal. What remained was practice and the strength of your magic to determine the size and complexity of the result. The hardest leap was always turning inanimate objects into living ones, a button into a beetle, for example. Unlike Lumos or Expelliarmus, which are distinct spells with little crossover, Transfiguration built on a single deeper competence. After 3 weeks of following the rules, Harry was growing restless. She knew the castle well enough now and wanted to explore more of the ancient corridors that her ancestors had walked, especially the big dog, the Cerberus, behind the right-hand door on the 3rd floor corridor. Why would anyone put a giant 3-headed dog in a corridor? Why a secret door? What was it guarding? For Gryffindor students, the mystery nearly tickled them to death. Dumbledore had the little wizards wrapped around his finger. Harry was eager to drag Ron, Jerry, and a reluctant Neville out to investigate the Cerberus. "Come on," Ron and Jerry shouted in perfect unison. I'm not going," Neville spluttered. "I need my sleep." "Sleep at 10 o'clock," Harry scoffed. "Get up and have a bit of fun." Before Neville could protest properly, Ron and Jerry, already wired with excitement, each grabbed an arm and hoisted him up. They carried him out of the common room like a sack of laundry. A few other restless students already knew there was a huge dog guarding a secret door on that stretch of corridor, but the beast was terrifying. It could lift its head and touch the ceiling. None of the first years would dare to show off with that kind of creature standing guard. Even Malfoy, when Harry had tricked him, had held his composure rather better than expected. Not wetting himself on the spot was a testament to some psychological backbone. Besides, the tales about giant mastiffs were everywhere. One mastiff could fight 5 tigers, 3 mastiffs could take on an aircraft carrier, 5 mastiffs could split the heavens, an absurd, half-serious set of boasts the students enjoyed repeating. Hermione was displeased that Ted didn't try to stop them from breaking the rules. Worse, he went along to watch. He had to drag her reluctantly, and she had followed only to keep an eye on everyone. "Oh my goodness," she murmured, peering through the gap. "It's even more terrifying than I imagined." They stomped around and poked for several days, but the Cerberus was uncooperative. No progress. Ted, practical as ever, tried to make sense of it. "There's more to it than meets the eye," he told them. "If someone put a creature like this here, there has to be a reason." Everyone else grumbled about secrets and conspiracies. Should they assume there was a trap laid by Dumbledore for Voldemort, or some ancient test? They bantered and speculated, but it didn't get them any closer to opening the door. Early on Friday morning of their 3rd week, both Neville and Harry received letters from Hagrid, invitations to come and bring friends for a visit. Neville and Harry told Ted and the others, and a weekend trip was agreed upon. "The twins say the Forbidden Forest is fascinating," Harry said brightly. "We should go while we're there and take a look." Ted frowned. "I think we ought to do things in stages. We haven't even properly mapped the castle yet. You're talking about wandering through the forest like it's a holiday stroll." "We should explore every corridor first," he continued. "Find all the secret passages. There are bound to be hidden things in this 1,000-year-old place." Ted was not keen on Harry roaming the Forbidden Forest. If she met a real danger like Voldemort out there, he knew there was little chance they could handle it. At least in the castle, they could rely on a little more safety and numbers. There were no afternoon classes on Friday, so they all set off together for Hagrid's hut without even stopping for lunch. Hagrid, who called himself the Keeper of Keys and Grounds, the Hogwarts groundskeeper and gamekeeper, kept a few chickens and a small patch of vegetables near the forest. He spent most of his time patrolling and looking after the creatures that lived on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. At a distance, Hagrid's hut looked like a simple round wooden house with a pointed roof. Up close, it revealed its true size. The entire building was one vast room, 5 or 6 meters high and more than 60 square meters in area. Ted felt like he was approaching a castle door rather than a cottage door. Harry rapped on it, and a loud, guttural bark sounded from inside. "Back, Fang, back!" Hagrid's booming voice called. "It must be Harry and Neville, and your friends." The huge wooden door opened, and a face surrounded by hair poked out. Hagrid's beard and hair seemed to merge into one shaggy mass. The floor inside was strewn with animal skins, and there was a massive fireplace with a pot hanging over it, large enough to feed half a classroom. The furniture was all oversized, the bed big enough for a family, a giant crossbow and quiver hung on the wall, and there was a huge hunting dog wagging its tail so fast it was a blur. Hagrid kept a firm hand on the collar. "That's Fang," he said, grinning. "He's big, but he don't bite." Everyone crowded in and petted the dog. Ted noticed, with a small start, that Fang had 2 tails. No wonder the tail wag looked like a propeller. Ted had seen such dogs before during his time working at a magical pet shop. "Hagrid, is Fang a swallowtail?" Ted asked. The dog's split tails were a swallowtail trait, though Fang's ears and face looked different from the breed. Hagrid's eyes lit up. "Blimey, you know about him? Ted, don't tell me you're interested in magical creatures." He grabbed Ted's shoulder in his giant hand, almost lifting him off the floor, and beamed. Ted tapped Hagrid's hand to tell him to calm down. "I used to work at a pet shop before I came here," he explained. "I've seen swallowtails, but Fang doesn't look like a pure one." "Of course he ain't pure," Hagrid crowed. "Fang's a cross, a flash dog crossed with a swallowtail." Fang, as if to punctuate the point, vanished with a soft woof and reappeared behind them. Harry startled. "Is that apparition?" she asked. "No," Hagrid said with a chuckle. "It's a flash, not as far as apparition, but he moves quicker than the eye. Flash dogs were only discovered about 10 years ago. Folks reckon they came from another place." He went on at length about how he'd managed to breed a cross between an otherworldly flash dog and a native swallowtail, his hands waving as if showing how the two traits had come together. After talking his throat dry, Hagrid slapped down a massive oak mug and drank deep, then remembered the invitation. Right, lunch will be ready soon. Have a few snacks first. He produced a large wooden platter piled with rock cakes the size of small plates. Ron and Jerry's stomachs made no complaint about choice. They each grabbed a rock cake and bit in eagerly. The others exchanged wary looks and then, since Hagrid had prepared them, dug in as well, the kind of awkward camaraderie that turned even dubious fare into a moment worth remembering. 33. The new king of the dark cooking world. Ted, Harry, and Hermione all stared at Ron with the same wary look. Ron had never been good at lying. "Why is your face yellow?" Ted asked. Ron rubbed his cheeks. "I put wax on it because it's cold. The biscuit was so hard it hurt my teeth." "Why is it red now?" Ted pressed. "I'm glowing," Ron blurted. Neville, ever innocent, actually believed him. He picked up one of Hagrid's rock cakes, which looked more like a hand-pressing stone than a biscuit, and bit in. Crack. "Wah, you two rascals!" Neville clapped a hand over his mouth, eyes watering. Ted and the others had already learned some of Hagrid's culinary vocabulary. Ted picked up a rock cake and tried to bite it. Was this even food for humans? Rock cakes were meant to be cracked-looking biscuits with raisins. They shouldn't be the hardness of actual rocks. Hagrid, however, seemed to have taken the name literally. If Hagrid ate them, his great jaw might have found them perfect. To everyone else, they were absurdly tough. Ted tossed one to Fang, who happily crunched and chomped. The sound was like brittle bones being chewed. Fang's teeth were truly something else. Ron watched, envious. If only he had a set like that, he could eat anything, and Lord Voldemort would be nothing to him. The pre-meal snacks remained largely untouched, and stomachs began to grumble. Even Ansu, the raucous raven perched on the clothes rack, couldn't wait. He kept squawking, "Eat, eat, 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 quack, quack, quack." Ted waved him down, let him hop onto the table, and fed him a strip of beef jerky to keep him quiet. Seeing Ron and Jerry with eyes like saucers, Ted reluctantly handed out 2 more pieces, then shook his head and muttered, "Are there many?" "No, there are not." No one understood the joke. Ted felt a little lonely about that. Hagrid, hearing Ansu's cries, peered closer. "Is that a talking raven? Well trained," he said, then began throwing side dishes into a huge pot. The dish he was making was billed as beef stew, and it lived up to the name only in the loosest sense. Hagrid added everything but the kitchen sink. Ted watched in alarm as Hagrid tossed in a pair of skinned, oversized paws, furry and enormous, like bear paws, of some unknown creature. Everyone exchanged worried looks as Hagrid stirred with a spoon the size of a fence post. He resembled the witch from Muggle fairy tales, cackling over a cauldron. Could anyone actually eat this? A half-giant's constitution might shrug it off, but would the rest of them be heading to the infirmary? Hagrid looked blissfully content, and Ted had to admit, Hagrid was a master of the darker culinary arts. "Please, Hagrid," Ted said finally, "I can give you a recipe. Don't waste food like that." Ted took over the cooking and, improvising, put together a sensible meal of roasted pumpkin and potatoes and a stew of dried meat and vegetables. Hagrid ended up finishing half the pot and insisted Ted share his secret. "It's MSG," Ted said, deadpan. "I put MSG in it." After dinner, Ted found a magazine on Hagrid's bedside table, Fantastic Beasts and Magic. "Can I take a look?" he asked, pointing to it. "Oh, of course," Hagrid said. "It's a niche periodical about fantastic beasts. They've printed newly discovered creatures from other parts of the world for years. I love it. I subscribe to every issue." Ted began to read, scanning for anything familiar. Hagrid brightened at his interest. "If you like it, you can borrow it, but make sure you bring it back. I'm still collecting them." He gestured with a carrot-thick finger toward a crude shelf nailed to the wall, where books and magazines about magical creatures were stacked. Ted thanked him. "I like it a lot." "You don't have to lend it. I've already finished reading it," he said, which was true in a way. He hadn't read every word, but he'd memorized the parts that mattered and would peruse the rest later. To Ted's surprise, he found an article by Professor Quirrell in the magazine, an essay on hybridizing fantastic beast bloodlines. Quirrell's ideas were bold, and the piece had drawn a lot of criticism. Many called him a madman, breeding new creatures, the magazine argued, was unethical and illegal. Ted rolled his eyes. Laws had loopholes. Powerful families and officials often wrote rules that conveniently spared themselves. Ron's father, for instance, was head of the ministry's misuse of Muggle artifacts office, hardly someone likely to be strict with influential wizards. The laws tended to govern the powerless. Hagrid, for his part, didn't care much for ministry rules. He'd shrug and say, "I'll raise whatever I want." On Sunday morning, Ted found Neville and Jerry trying to calm an angry Ron. "What happened?" Ted asked. Jerry explained, "It's because of Dean." Dean Thomas, one of Neville, Ron, and Jerry's dormitory mates, was a Muggle-raised boy who loved football. During some dorm chatter, he'd been explaining football rules when Ron had scoffed. "What's the point of a bunch of people who can't fly chasing a ball on the ground?" Ron had sniffed. "Why not have more balls? Or use sticks? Hit the other team with sticks. Is that it? Is that it?" he'd mocked. Predictably, tempers flared. Ted nodded, saying nothing at first. Ron, still fuming, turned to Ted. "Tell me, Ted, is Muggle football actually interesting?" Ted put down his chopsticks and thought a moment. "Ron, Muggles have many forms of entertainment. There are dozens of ball games alone. Don't belittle other people's hobbies. It doesn't matter if someone is a Muggle or a wizard. If you like wizard chess and he likes gobstones, that doesn't stop you from being friends. You share a room. You'll be together for 7 years." That evening, to everyone's surprise, Ron awkwardly apologized to Dean and even offered him a Dumbledore chocolate frog card. Dean, who'd grown up mostly in the Muggle world, was delighted. The little animated Dumbledore was pure joy to him. Ted couldn't help but grin. Ron was still Ron, but he had heart. Earlier, in the last week of October during potions class, Neville had once again been on the receiving end of Snape's barbed attention. Snape hated incompetence and had no patience for the foolish. He'd aimed his venom squarely at Neville, who usually crumpled under the professor's sharp remarks. This time, Neville's eyes filled with tears, but they stubbornly refused to fall. He'd been trying to be brave, taking Ted's advice to heart. Snape seemed puzzled by Neville's stubbornness and pressed harder. Harry and Ted couldn't stand it, and both spoke up in Neville's defense. Snape glanced at Harry with a look of contempt, then turned to Ted. "Contradicting a professor," he said coolly. "Ravenclaw, 5 points." Ted stared back for a beat, thinking only 5 points? Come on, be stronger. Harry huffed beside him, half amused. "What about me? Deduct my points then. It's the last day of the month. Use your monthly votes." By the time Ted looked up, a month had already passed. He and the others had been at Hogwarts for 4 weeks. Tomorrow would be October, and the system would refresh its monthly otherworld knowledge. So he decided to take stock of what he'd gained. Character interface. Name, Ted Epiphany. Level, Wizard L1, Mind Mage L1. Experience pool, 3,472 attributes. Average adult Muggle equals 5. Strength 3, Constitution 5, Agility 4, Intelligence 6, Perception 7, +1 from Wand, Spirit 9, Charm 7, Luck, fluctuates, baseline 0. Talent, Otherworld Knowledge, Gold. Skills, Magic Power level 2, +1 Wand, Transfiguration level 2, Spell level 1 Wand, Magic Resistance level 1, Mind Power level 1, Mental Resistance level 2, Prophecy level 1, Spells, Lumos LV2, Scouring Charm, LV2, Packing Charm, LV2, Mending Charm, LV1, Water Making Charm, LV1, Bubblehead Charm, LV1, Levitation Charm, LV1, Expelliarmus level 1, and more. Psionics, Appraisal, Memory Palace, Spirit Crystal Servant, Uncast, Reading, Charm Art, Conceal Thoughts, Mental Encouragement. Cards, Restore Stamina, green, Ravenclaw's Wisdom, blue, Boar Firecracker, green, Mysterious Dance Flute, green, Neville's Failed Scabies Potion, green. Quests, Explore Hogwarts, red, The Corridor on the right, on the 3rd floor, right, green, A Student Life Without Deducted Points is Incomplete, blue. Academy Model, blue, Good Student, blue. Over 3,000 experience points. That felt like a victory, mostly because he hadn't spent any of it yet. Experience could raise skill levels or be invested directly into spells. For example, upgrading Lumos from LV1 to LV2 cost 200 experience. He didn't need to practice to reach LV2 if he paid. The spell's effect and proficiency would jump immediately. But Ted hadn't spent the points because he worried the new monthly otherworld knowledge might require a large sum. Spells could be advanced by practice too. At most, 200 successful uses would usually raise a spell a level, so with focus, it took only a week or two to reach ELV2. But missing out on a rare otherworld knowledge because of low experience would be a painful regret. Lumos at ELV2 felt noticeably better, more stable, brighter, lasted about a minute and a half without flickering. Ted had simplified the incantation to a single word, Lumos, so it was almost silent casting. Between that and his mind power, his control over magical energy was fine-tuned. He could trigger spells with a subtle prompt rather than full dramatic gestures. He suspected that Lumos LV3 would let him cast silently outright. Wandless casting, though, that felt far off. Maybe it required LV5 in the system, where skills and spells ran from LV1 to LV9. Typically, a standout 5th-year student might have many spells at about LV3, and a top 7th-year student could push to LV4. Reaching LV5 was when true silent casting for that spell would become accessible. Ted was a special case because of his extra mind mage talents. He thought about how every wizard tended to have 1 or 2 spells they were exceptionally good at. Lockhart's memory charm was a notorious example, and in the original stories, Harry's use of Expelliarmus had special significance, even leading to the climax with the Elder Wand. Passionate, intuitive wizards could push a spell far beyond their general level. Scholars like Hermione had another route entirely. Ted had improved at Transfiguration. He could now change a matchstick into a steel needle reliably, which pushed Transfiguration to ELV2. Breaking that small barrier suddenly made other transformations easier. The limits were now mostly a matter of proficiency and the amount of magical energy he could muster. He'd also sought out Professor Flitwick and learned Expelliarmus, then practiced for several days in an abandoned classroom with a broken training dummy. On the psionics side, he'd unlocked mental encouragement, so this month's focus had been on learning and developing mind power. He'd kept a low profile, no sneaking around at night, no reckless adventures. He was tempted by the idea of an invisibility cloak and wandering the ancient castle, but as a first year, he wanted to concentrate on learning and getting stronger. Better to be ready for danger than to court it for thrills. He wasn't the protagonist of a formulaic web novel. At least, he didn't plan to act like one. Ted also started organizing a recommended reading list. His time working at Flourish and Blots had paid off. Whenever he had a spare moment, he'd recorded hundreds, even thousands of book titles from the wizarding world, many on basic magical theory. He felt primary education for many young wizards was sloppy. Language and basic writing were often covered, but math stopped at simple addition and subtraction. Multiplication and division were rarely taught. Their understanding of magic could be shallow and one-sided, so he made a structured list to guide new students from theory through basic spells and household charms. Controlling Your Magic Power, a must-read for little wizards. The Truth of Magic Power, Overview of Magic, Underlying Principles of Modern Magic, Detailed Explanation of Basic Spells, Complete Household Magic, 1983 edition, and many more titles organized by learning order. Hermione found him hunched over the list one afternoon and asked quietly, "What are you doing?" "Summarizing this month's gains," Ted said, "and organizing a knowledge system. Most little wizards are taught at home, and not every parent is a teacher. There are gaps, especially in math and basic science, and people only get a superficial view of magic. I want a reading order so beginners can build a solid base." Hermione's eyes lit up. She treasured the list like a rare find. That made sense. She was the scholarly type, not someone who could boost a spell by sheer passion. A proper foundation mattered to her. Neville and a few others joined in. Harry and Ginny were too restless, and Ron had trouble settling, but Neville, slow but steady, worked through the list. Professor Flitwick eventually saw it and couldn't help exclaiming, "Even in Ravenclaw, there haven't been many students like Ted. He'll do great things." The next morning was October. As Ted woke, the system pinged. Ding, talent, otherworld knowledge, gold, triggered. Discovered Ur's book, green. Ur's book, green, contained the research notes and summoning theory of a Dalaran mage named regarding an otherworld entity, werewolves. The book required 350 experience to exchange. Ted's stomach tightened. The last piece of otherworld knowledge he'd been offered had been the Dalaran Canon Fodder Mage Training Manual. Now it was another Dalaran mage's work. He remembered the book from his old Azeroth runs. Back in the Horde days, low-level players had to visit classic dungeons, Ragefire Chasm, Shadowfang Keep, and Wailing Caverns. Ur's book had been part of a quest in Shadowfang Keep, a mage trying to summon werewolves from another world to fight the Scourge. According to the tales, abandoned the research because those werewolves were too brutal and evil, possibly no better than the Scourge itself. Another mage later picked up the notes and used them. He became Alugao, the final boss of Shadowfang Keep, a manual on summoning and controlling otherworld werewolves. Ted swore under his breath. Werewolves weren't unheard of in the wizarding world, but this was summoning powerful, alien, and potentially contagious werewolves from another realm. He couldn't in good conscience spend experience on that. Too risky, too uncontrollable. Ted closed the exchange window. No book for him. He'd save the 350, or the whole pool, if need be, and spend his experience on leveling and learning instead. If the monthly knowledge kept being useless, he'd keep leveling up on his own. 35. Frost Armor. Having made up his mind, Ted spent 1,000 experience points and leveled his wizard up to level 2. His character panel immediately awarded him 1 attribute point and 1 skill point. After a moment's thought, he put the attribute point into Spirit, bringing it to 10, twice that of an ordinary person. Spirit was crucial for both wizards and mind mages, so it was a valuable investment. He spent the skill point on magic, raising it to magic level 3. Ted stretched his hand and felt the change. His magic was much, much stronger, at least twice as potent as before. A hot surge of energy made him want to smash something. "I really want to level up again," he muttered, but he kept himself in check. Leveling too fast was dangerous. Power had to be mastered, otherwise it was only theoretical. You didn't want to reach magic level 9 and be unable to control it, constantly suffering magical backlash or worse, turning into an obscurial bomb. He still had otherworld knowledge from September to study. October's book had been unreliable, but the older material remained. The training manuals used to train cannon fodder mages in Dalaran were also invaluable. When he'd first enrolled, he'd focused on textbook magic and been cautious about control. Cannon fodder mages used highly destructive spells, and any mistake could have dire consequences. Now, after finishing most of the first-year spell curriculum in a month and feeling a big boost from leveling up, he could finally try things he'd hesitated on before. Ted had played World of Warcraft on and off for over 10 years, so he was familiar with the mage class, even if he hadn't studied it deeply. In-game mages, who only knew combat spells, were essentially cannon fodder compared to lore mages in Dalaran. Dalaran's real mages must have lots of non-combat spells for daily life. How else would they manage without magic for chores? Even a low-level combat mage manual had 16 spells, which showed being a cannon fodder mage wasn't something anyone could pick up casually. The manual divided spells into 3 schools: Frost, Fire, and Arcane. In lore, there were other things too. Otherworld summoning, studied by and Alugao, Kel'Thuzad's secret necromancy, warlock shadow powers, even time magic like time warp, but those were beyond him for now. The conventional 3 schools alone would keep him busy for years. The frost spells in the manual included Ice Arrow, Frost Armor, and Frost Nova. Fire had Fire Impact, Fireball, and Flame Strike. Arcane had Arcane Wisdom, Arcane Missiles, Create Water, Create Food, Transfiguration, Slow Fall, Magic Suppression, Flash, Evocation, and Teleport, Dalaran. This was roughly the toolkit of a level 20 mage in the game, perfect for dealing with bandits, beasts, kobolds, murlocs, and jackalwares, but hopeless against truly dangerous monsters or powerful magic users. Faced with the list, Ted thought about priorities. He wasn't chasing raw destructive power. He was a first-year student. What threats would he actually face? Even if trouble came, would a single ice arrow or fireball be decisive? The arcane school seemed attractive. Arcane wisdom would boost intelligence and speed up learning. First years all started on equal footing. Any early advantage could snowball. He already had several buffs: flow state, mental encouragement, memory palace, reading, restore stamina, green, and Ravenclaw's wisdom, blue. Add arcane wisdom and he'd be way ahead. But arcane spells were complex and risky. They weren't the simple shoot and hit of ice and fire. Arcane wisdom had to be cast on a person, himself or an ally, and miscasting could turn it into a weakness curse. Better to wait until his spellcasting level was higher. Create water and create food weren't urgent. Slow Fall had alternatives like levitation charm and cushioning charm. Teleport, Dalaran was out of the question, too advanced, and there was no Dalaran in this world anyway. Transfiguration, magic suppression, flash, and evocation were all too demanding for now. Evocation, in particular, temporarily awakens a mage's internal stores of magic and required a deep understanding he didn't have yet. After weighing the options, Ted settled on a defensive spell, Frost Armor. Ice and fire spells tended to be simpler, and since this was his first foray into magic outside the magic world, starting with something straightforward made sense. Ice Arrow was arguably the simplest offensive spell, but offensive magic carried social risks. People might call it a dark curse. Even prank spells like Rictusempra could be labeled dark, and Ted, a novice, didn't need that trouble. Ice Arrow did pack a punch. The manual said its physical damage could penetrate a 1-centimeter pine board from 10 meters away. A person in ordinary cloth struck in the head or chest might die instantly. Even a mage with level 1 magic resistance would be badly hurt without a defensive spell. Ted wasn't here to go hunting people. He needed practical protection. Rather than chasing offensive power, it was more useful to learn how to call for help, send up spark signals when in danger. But before he learned Protego, Frost Armor would be his primary protection. Adapting the Azerothian spells to this world wouldn't be automatic. Azerothian magic used incantations and gestures. Here magic was channeled through wand work and different ritual models. He had to translate the spell model, build a new incantation, and reconstruct the gestures to work with wand-based casting. Ted decided to study related concepts, freezing spell, stunning spell, and Protego, to help build Frost Armor. The shield charm would be hard to master quickly, but its conceptual framework could be borrowed. The other two were simpler, and with Professor Flitwick's obvious fondness for him, he felt comfortable asking for help. He applied to Professor Flitwick for access to an abandoned classroom and scavenged several battered training dummies. For the next week, he spent almost every after-school hour researching and practicing. The results were mixed but promising. On the plus side, he had successfully analyzed the spell and devised a working incantation. He could cast Frost Armor. On the downside, his version was clumsy. The incantation was long, 7 words, and the wand movements were convoluted, requiring 2 or 3 seconds of waving. It chewed through magic like crazy. 1 Frost Armor cost as much mana as casting 7 or 8 Expelliarmus in succession. The inefficiency came from a poor conversion of the spell model. The incantation was bloated, the wand path awkward, the mobilization of magic weak, and his casting will not yet precise. It needed optimization. The spells taught in the magic world had been refined by countless wizards over centuries. They weren't always the most powerful possible forms, but they were easy to learn, reliable, and mana-efficient. Thinking of innovation made him admire Snape all the more. By his 6th year, Snape had already created Levicorpus, Langlock, and Sectum Sempra. Sectum Sempra was a top-tier dark arts invention. Snape's talent in the dark arts was extraordinary. If he hadn't been consumed by his personal torments, he might have become a dark wizard whose name was recorded in the history of magic. Ted never used appraisal on the professors. It was useless against people much stronger than you and could attract attention or irritation from sensitive people, so there was no point in provoking them. Still, aside from Dumbledore, Snape was probably the strongest duelist at the school, even if he was the youngest among the 4 deans. Thoughts like that kept Ted focused on measured progress. A new month begins. Please vote. 36. Mysterious Mirror. Ted had been distant for the past few days, and his friends noticed. Hermione, especially, saw him practicing magic alone in the abandoned classroom and spending long stretches in the library studying things she couldn't quite follow. She worried and felt uncomfortably left out. "He's going to leave me behind," she fretted. The rest of the Gryffindor group noticed too. After 4 or 5 days, Ted sat brooding even at meals. Nowhere near as lively as Ansu, who was busy devouring fries. "Is something on his mind?" Ron asked. "Doesn't look like it. More like he's trying to solve a problem," Jerry said. Hermione nodded. "He said he's researching new magic." "New magic? Is it a prank spell?" Neville asked, surprised. Finally, Harry put a plan together. Why are we guessing? Let's go ask Ted directly. I've got an idea. No, no, Harry, not this time. No need, everyone protested. That evening at dinner, Ted finished quickly, waved, and left. The five of them exchanged looks. Ron shoved a chicken leg into his mouth. Jerry slipped some cheese into a lunchbox for a snack later, and they all got up. Let's follow him. Ted reached the abandoned classroom at the end of the fifth-floor corridor and called into the empty hall. Come on out. You've been trailing me for days. What's on your minds? Harry scowled inwardly at the failure of his surprise plan. My brilliant plan. You heard us. Ted laughed as Hermione, Ron, Harry, Jerry, and Ansu stepped into the doorway. The combined sound of you five sneaking is louder than a drum. Hermione pushed forward. Ted, are you researching dangerous magic? Ted looked at their serious, worried faces and couldn't help laughing. Ha ha, thanks for the concern. Come in. I'll show you what I've been up to. Inside the classroom, Ted pointed his wand at an old training dummy at the far end. This is the freezing spell. It freezes and immobilizes. A pale blue bolt flew from his wand and struck the dummy 6 or 7 meters away. A thin layer of ice spread over its body instantly. Wow, cool, Jerry exclaimed. Harry clapped. Nice. Ted, were you hiding out here just to practice that? Teach me. I'll use it on Malfoy next time. Poor Malfoy, Harry thought. That's not all, Ted said. There's also the stunning spell. He sent a reddish spell at the dummy, but nothing obvious happened. This is the stunning spell? Hermione asked. Yes, Ted said. It slows movements, usually lasts about 10 seconds. I haven't perfected the shield charm yet, so I won't demonstrate that. So you were practicing higher year spells? Ron said, stunned. He felt hopeless. Why are there so many overachievers? No, I'm not practicing these spells. I'm inventing a new one, Ted said. His friends went silent. A new spell. He drew a complex pattern in the air instead of pointing at the battered dummy and spoke, Frost, bodyguard. An ice shield flickered into being above Ted's head and then vanished. The room dropped a few degrees. Everyone felt an instant chill, as if they'd stepped out wearing a t-shirt in the snow. Ron shivered, wrapping his arms around himself. What did you do? Magic, Ted explained. He'd combined elements of the freezing spell, the stunning spell, and parts of the shield charm to create an invisible layer of protective ice that hovered around him. The transparent ice could block some low-level spells and defend against physical attacks. Striking it would slow the attacker too. Right now, it lasted 6 minutes. Punch me, Ted said to Ron. Let me. Harry, Gryffindor's boxing enthusiast, volunteered and threw a punch at Ted's smooth, fair cheek. The blow hit the ice with a muffled thud. Frost clung to Harry's arm. Ugh, freezing. His muscles tensed from the cold and his movements slowed. This is brilliant. Teach me, Harry said, eyes bright. The others were excited too. Ted raised his hands. Not yet. It's only an early prototype. Not finished? Right, it takes a long time to draw the wand pattern and it drains a lot of magic. I still need to optimize it. He had, however, settled on the incantation after many trials. The words had to state the spell's attribute and its form. Frost for the attribute and bodyguard for the manifest form. The wand trajectory, though, was still problematic. He wanted to replace the complicated wand movement with a simple hand gesture so it could be cast barehanded. The idea of a frost armor spell lit a brief blaze of enthusiasm among his friends. The library saw more late nights and practice sessions, but that energy only lasted a few days. To learn frost armor, you needed the freezing spell, the stunning spell, and the shield charm. Freezing was second-year work, stunning third year, shield charm fifth year, high prerequisites. Ron and Jerry spent 4 days trying to master the freezing spell, then gave up. Wait until he's finished and teach us, they said. We won't bother you anymore. Harry and Hermione advanced faster. They picked up freezing and stunning and were now working on the shield charm. One afternoon, the Weasley twins found Ted during lunch, whispered to him, then left. Ron leaned in immediately afterwards. What did George and Fred say? They were acting so secretive. Ted said, they found something strange and asked me to come look at it. Harry's eyes lit up. What are we waiting for? Let's go. After lunch, everyone hurried to find the twins. Right this way, George said, leading them down a quiet corridor. He pointed to a wall, and there in a niche hung an oval half-length mirror with an ornate silver frame. It was tarnished and layered with dust, as if it hadn't been polished in years. "A mirror?" Ron asked, puzzled. Fred slung an arm around him, teasing, "Don't look with your eyes. Look with your heart, you dolt." Ted rolled his eyes at Fred's theatrics. "Eyes can't see most magic," he said. "But if you have keen perception, you can feel its presence. Reach out and try." Hermione, whose perception and control of magic were excellent, stepped forward. She laid a hand on the glass. "There is magic," she said. "And this dust, can't someone wipe it off?" "Smart," George said. They'd all noticed something odd. Most decorations in the castle, paintings, armor, kept bright by house elves, but this mirror had a heavy, unexplained film of dust. Ted felt the magic inside it. It was layered and unfamiliar, not a type he'd learned. His foundation was still shallow, and he couldn't identify it. "Does anyone here know Revelio?" Ted asked. "No. It sounds like a fourth-year spell. Looks like I'll have to learn it first," Ron muttered. "Thanks to Reader Ultimate Old Train for the 500 reward. Thanks to Reader Chi 1 for the 100 reward. Thank you." 37. Magic Paper Crane. "Oh, I still have to learn spells," Ron complained. When would these days of studying spells end? Couldn't there be a time when he could just eat chicken legs, play wizard's chess, and live comfortably? At the sound of their younger brother's embarrassing remark, George and Fred immediately wrapped arms around his neck, one on each side, as if to say they might decapitate him with a clothesline if he spoke again. "Oh, my foolish brother, how could you say such a thing?" George teased. "Little Ronnie, you're a wizard. If you don't even learn spells, what kind of wizard are you?" Fred added. "Little Ronnie?" Harry laughed. Ron's face flushed crimson. "Don't call me that." Despite his grumbling, Ron couldn't abandon the group. Everyone else was trying to learn new spells to uncover the mystery of the mirror. Neville was practicing diligently too. Besides, who would play chess with him constantly? Peer pressure and the desire not to be left behind pulled him along. Gryffindors loved adventure, and Hermione loved puzzles, so he had no real choice. Ted had learned the basics of the new magic in a single night. The next day, after a quick lunch, the group hurried back to the secluded corridor where the mirror lay. Ron walked with a chicken leg in hand, gnawing as he went. Malfoy, who had been watching, quietly tailed them for a while, but disappeared around a corner as the group turned into a semicircle before the mirror. Malfoy muttered to himself and left without a backward glance. Ron rubbed his chin. "This is the first time I've realized Malfoy can be clever." At the mirror, Ted drew his wand and tapped the glass. Apparesium. The dusty film scattered and the surface cleared. Instead of reflecting anyone, the mirror showed a metal ornament hung on a wall. A colorful moth made from wire. Below the image, a simple incantation was written, "Moth Flutter." "What does that mean?" Ron asked. "Find something?" Jerry guessed. "Is that a spell written under it?" Neville wondered. George scratched his bright hair. "Fred, doesn't that look familiar?" "That's right, we've seen it somewhere." Fred slapped his thigh. Ted studied the moth until the image faded, then cast Apparesium again. The same view returned. "Looks like we have to find it," he said. Judging by the wall and the style, it's inside Hogwarts. To the right of the spot should be a large potted plant. To the left, a staircase. Before afternoon classes, the twins rounded everyone up. "We found it. We'll tell you at dinner," they said. They really had found it. On a basement level of the right tower, a seldom visited corner of the castle. No one would notice a palm-sized metal ornament next to the stairs. "We tried it, but it only wriggled a bit," George shrugged. Ron was impatient. He raised his wand, said, "Moth Flutter," and the ornament only twitched its antennae. Harry and Hermione tried next and did a little better. The moth flapped its wings. Finally, Ted stepped forward and cast the spell. The moth flapped a few times, flew down from the wall, and circled Ted's wand. "Follow me," Ted urged, guiding it all the way back to the mirror. As they approached, the moth left the wand and landed in the blank space below the glass. Melting into it, the mirror flashed faintly, and an old piece of parchment appeared on its surface. "Ding! Solved the magic puzzle, gained 88 experience," the mirror announced. Ted carefully plucked up the parchment. It was full of neat script and diagrams, an invented spell recorded by an earlier student. "This is a paper crane spell," he said, skimming the notes. It animates a paper crane that flies to a target to deliver a message. It's a short-range communication spell, useful around Hogwarts or nearby villages, and the recipient needs to be somebody the crane can recognize. Still, it's fascinating. It borrows some tracking ideas from messenger owls, worth studying. Everyone buzzed with excitement, except Ron, who muttered about the effort it took. The prospect of a new spell and a new way to pass messages without relying on owls or Ansu thrilled the group. Ted liked that puzzles were a steady way to gain experience, rare treasures hidden in a 1,000-year-old castle left by former students for whoever stumbled upon them. After the mirror, their adventurous streak kicked into overdrive. They scurried all over Hogwarts, the common room, the library, the Great Hall, the kitchens, corridors, and classrooms. Harry began nightly prowls under his invisibility cloak, often not returning to bed until after 1 in the morning. His eyes grew tired. Ted suggested he stop by Madame Pomfrey and ask for a dreamless sleep potion to get proper rest. On one of their rambles, Jerry and Neville had to go back for forgotten books and stumbled on a curious sealed door. It wasn't just a decorative door. It bore odd numbers and patterns and was ringed by a circle of animal reliefs. The twins were ecstatic. Overhearing their parents, they'd heard stories of a mysterious door Bill and his friends had once opened. They tried Alohomora, but the spell failed. This door was magically sealed. Determined, the whole gang set to work. The door's riddle matched reliefs in the surrounding corridor. Adjusting those reliefs to the right positions and then using Alohomora unsealed the door. Inside lay a wooden box, another relic from a past student. It contained 2 classic prank toys and a prank spell, the leg locker curse. Ted earned another 88 experience. The toys were old collector's items more than dangerous artifacts, but the idea of knowing a mischievous dark spell excited everyone, especially at the thought of using it on Malfoy and the Slytherins. Even Ron perked up and began practicing seriously. Using appraisal, Ted discovered Ron had a natural knack for the dark arts. Ron's dark arts level was already at 2. The discovery prompted shocked laughter and teasing. Among the Gryffindors, a traitor to their squeaky clean image had emerged. Ted, Hermione, Harry, Neville, Ron, and Jerry formed a tight little group, the Hogwarts Six. They explored safely within the castle's walls, which Ted preferred. The twins, in particular, were less likely to wander off into the Forbidden Forest when they were kept busy. This year, with Professor Quirrell about, getting lost outside could be dangerous. Ted also learned something new about his own ability. The mind power charm art that seemed to influence people also worked on animals, especially those with simpler minds. It explained why his job at the magical pet shop had been easy. He'd encountered Filch's cat, Madame Norris, several times. A few treats and a little of his attention had the cat purring and seeking him out. Filch had almost trampled him once in his fury, shoving Madame Norris onto his shoulder as he stalked away. The cat still looked back at Ted as if affectionate, which made Filch's glare all the worse. Thanks to reader Shanglin Yuandao Chong for the 1,500 reward. Thank you. Protego. Ted flicked his wand. A thin magical shield flashed into being in front of him and then winked out. He had finally managed to cast the shield charm. The magic interface registered shield charm LV1, and a little notification popped up, plus 65 XP for learning a new spell. He should have been pleased, but testing its effectiveness only left him mildly disheartened. He sent a small ball hurtling at the shield with magic. The charm didn't stop it. He tried again with a sheet of parchment. Same result. Even a gentle gust seemed to push straight through. The problem wasn't the ability to say the words. It was the strength of the ward. The shield charm he had just produced was as fragile as a cicada's wing, as easily broken as a soap bubble. It might as well not have been there. Magic wasn't like arithmetic, where 1 + 1 = 2, and that's that. Casting a spell was only the beginning. Power, stability, finesse, those had to be honed by repetition and refinement, like learning a craft. Ted reminded himself of that as he reviewed the other charms he had learned. The leg-locking hex locomotor mortis acquired from solving a puzzle which could glue a target's legs together, and Den Saojeo picked up on an adventure which made the victim's front teeth grow so long their mouth stayed open, both useful in their own limited ways for disrupting an opponent's ability to cast. Locomotor mortis was better at restricting movement than disabling wand use. Denso Geo could interrupt speech and concentration. Experimentation and practice would tell him what each spell could actually do in a duel. After a long day of study and practice, Ted needed to unwind. He took his old guitar and climbed to a deserted terrace. He tuned the strings and let his fingers fall into a gentle pattern. He played Down by the Sally Garden, the haunting song set to Yeats's poem. The melody drifted along the empty corridors and over the battlements, carried by the evening breeze and the sinking sun. William Butler Yeats, an Irish poet and mystic, leader of Ireland's literary revival, had given the words. The tune gave them life, soft and strange and full of longing. The castle seemed to listen. A paper crane fluttered across the terrace and landed on his palm, folding itself back into a note. Hermione's neat handwriting. "Where are you?" "I heard a guitar. Are you playing?" Ted smiled. He answered her quickly and headed back toward the dormitory with his guitar slung over his shoulder. Before he left, he glanced at a pale patch of stone on the far wall. After he turned away, an off-white figure emerged from that same wall, a woman, the Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's house ghost, who'd been lingering to catch the music. The dormitory was quieter than usual, but their usual meeting place, an abandoned classroom, was already occupied. Ted found his friends sitting in a loose semicircle, trading stories in low voices. He caught Jerry's triumphant squeal first. "When I got to Hogwarts, I, the rat, can finally eat cheese until I'm full. Long live Hogwarts." Jerry had taken to calling himself Rat as a joke. Some nicknames stuck easily among the group. Ted sank onto a dusty bench and listened as the conversation turned to how different their lives had become since they arrived at Hogwarts. Hermione didn't need much time to explain. For her, Hogwarts had opened a door into a new world. She wasn't interested just in marks or rankings. She loved the knowledge itself. Even the dry-sounding history of magic had become a wonder, full of curious tales and uncanny lessons. Interest, Ted thought, was the truest kind of talent. Harry and Ron's introductions to magic, by contrast, had been muddled and uneven. Harry had picked up scraps from his strange, harsh childhood and from time with Sirius, but none of it amounted to complete training. Ron, despite coming from a wizarding family, hadn't actually cast a spell before he arrived at school. Wizards, living widely scattered, didn't always find toy companions or tutors for the kids at home. Small wizarding communities were rare. It made sense now that Harry's lone childhood playmate was Draco Malfoy, an odd, privileged upbringing that came with its own baggage. Ron's family life explained a lot about his blunt, easygoing nature. With 7 children, the Weasleys didn't have time to fuss over every single thing. Bill, as the eldest, had been doted on for accomplishments. The middle children got different kinds of attention. The household's resources tended to pass down through the family. New things went from one sibling to the next. And the youngest, Ginny, now received the affectionate focus that comes with being the baby of a big, loving clan. Ron's parents loved him, but with so many children, energy was dispersed and some things inevitably slipped. The twins were endlessly mischievous. Percy, Peggy as Jerry teased, was the ambitious middle child who often got praise for good behavior, and some of Ron's old grievances were simply the rough and tumble of a crowded home. Neville listened more than he spoke. For him, coming to Hogwarts had been a relief beyond words. His childhood had been shadowed by expectations. The thought of failing his family or dishonoring the sacrifices his parents had made weighed on him constantly. At home, every day felt like stepping on a scale of judgment. Here at school, people treated him as Neville, not as a symbol. His mistakes were met with patience. His clumsy moments became learning opportunities. When bullies from Slytherin pushed too far, his friends were the first to stand between him and trouble. Herbology, with its patient professor who appreciated Neville's steady hands and care for plants, became paradise. He had at last found a place where he could breathe. Jerry's own story was harder. His mother had stumbled into the wizarding world during the second celestial convergence and found, to her astonishment, that she was pregnant. The status of people who arrived from other worlds had been a contentious issue. Ignorance and prejudice existed, and some dark sorts had even trafficked in humanoids from elsewhere. Even after the ministry officially recognized them as people, many private attitudes remained cold. Hogwarts had been the first place where Jerry met others who accepted him for who he was. He joked about cheese freedom, but the relief behind the joke was genuine. Acceptance, friends, a safe place to be a child. Ted listened to them, remembering the day his own acceptance letter arrived at the orphanage, the strange new hope it had opened up, and the odd years he'd spent working among the oddities of Diagon Alley. He'd learned to find ways to research and to copy homework when needed. More importantly, he'd learned how to belong. They didn't break into games that evening or plot mischief. They simply sat together and spoke quietly, each voice filling in the picture of how they'd come to be friends. That honest, uncalculated closeness, friendship without strings, without ulterior motives, felt fragile and precious. Ted knew, with the small, sharp certainty only youth affords, that once you grew out of this moment, you would long for it. For now, though, they had it, and it was enough. Chapter 39, Professor Quirrell and Miss Gray. Today's Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson was about Grindylows. Professor Quirrell stammered through the facts. Grindylows were non-native creatures that had appeared after the convergence of the stars. They favored water, were blue or green, had toad-like skin, were slimy, sported fins and patches of scales, and had webbed hands and feet tipped with sharp claws. They ate meat, live prey and carrion alike, and were superb swimmers and ambushers. In the water, they were tremendously strong and very dangerous. Unlike ordinary native water creatures that mostly ate fish and shrimp, these Grindylows would attack humans, sometimes dragging victims under to drown and even devour them. If you encounter a Grindylow, Quirrell warned, do not let it pull you into the water. If it does, you will almost certainly die. A Grindylow expulsion charm might work if you can keep a safe distance. Quirrell's delivery was nervous and halting, and it didn't help his reputation. He was unpopular. Aside from a few diligent note-takers, most of the class drifted off, paying him about as much attention as ducks listening to thunder. Two students, however, listened with sharp interest. Hermione Granger and Ted Epiphany both caught the key phrase, Grindylow expulsion charm. Hermione raised her hand at once. Miss Granger. Professor, what spell is the Grindylow expulsion charm? Oh, the Grindylow expulsion charm. That's an expulsion charm taught in 4th year. It's rather difficult, Quirrell said, brushing off the question. He was the sort of teacher who did just enough to get by, never eager to give extra help, which explained a lot about his sheepish manner. Ted put his hand up as well. Professor, since Grindylows came to our world, have they mutated or hybridized with native aquatic creatures? Have any new species emerged? That was the kind of question that lit Quirrell up. Ted had once read Quirrell's article on the hybridization of magical bloodlines in Hagrid's magazine, and he knew the professor had an interest in the field. For a moment, Quirrell's eyes gleamed and his posture changed. Oh, that's a very interesting question. Perhaps we can discuss it after class. Quirrell kept Ted behind, and, to the surprise of everyone who had judged him merely fussy and evasive, spent 10 minutes talking seriously about the innate abilities and bloodline inheritance of magical creatures. He spoke in technical, precise terms and showed more depth on the subject than anyone had expected. Hermione was annoyed. Why hadn't she been invited to listen too? Ted shrugged when she complained. Apparently, Quirrell had been reluctant to talk through subjects like bloodline hybridization in front of a girl, he said. Quirrell's attitude towards Ted changed subtly after that meeting. He no longer saw the boy as just a conscientious student, but as someone to mentor and advise. If Quirrell didn't literally have a face on the back of his head, Ted thought he'd suggest the man go study genetics in the Muggle world. That night, Ted lay in bed and practiced a different sort of discipline, meditation. He'd been experimenting for a few days, inspired by a psychology book he'd brought to school, Jung's The Secret of the Golden Flower. Jung's notes on the Taoist golden flower and inner alchemy had given Ted a model for disciplined inner work. As a mind mage, Ted believed cultivating the spirit state would strengthen his abilities. Meditation could deepen his consciousness, help him detach from the body enough to explore inner and outer perceptions. After a few nights of practice, he was making real progress. His awareness would sink and expand. Sometimes it felt like leaving the body and spreading outward, sometimes like plunging inward. The sensations had names: inner vision, spirit sight. Tonight his spirit edge extended past the dormitory walls, down the corridor, and into the Ravenclaw common room. He sensed a presence there, or rather two. Who's there? The Grey Lady, pale and sorrowful, mourning at the Ravenclaw bust, whispered aloud, startled. Ted's consciousness reached toward her. The Grey Lady? Is that you? Ted Epiphany? What magic are you using to speak with me? Where are you? The Grey Lady's voice trembled. Even as a ghost, she was taken aback by the sudden quiet presence. Wait, I'll be right there, Ted answered, and climbed down to the common room in his pajamas, wand dimly glowing. The stars painted on the ceiling and walls gave the room a faint, chill light. Good evening, Grey Lady, Ted said. She inclined her head. Good evening. They weren't strangers. Whenever Ted practiced the piano, she would linger nearby and listen. He'd noticed her before. She asked, curious and cautious, "What magic was that? How did you reach me?" Took up a little spirit exploration, Ted said, choosing his words carefully. I did it accidentally just now. The Grey Lady's face grew solemn. Spirit exploration is no small matter. You should wait a few more years before attempting things like that. You may be right, Ted conceded. If he weren't a mind mage, he wouldn't have risked diving that deep before 5th year. Why are you here, then? He asked, changing the subject. Ghosts, after all, had abundant idle time, and she seemed reluctant to talk. For a long moment she hesitated, the usual polite phrases caught in her throat. Then something like wariness or relief slid through her. She moved to touch the bust, but her hand passed through stone. I'm paying my respects to Ravenclaw, she began. She, Rowena, is my mother. My name is not Grey. Ted, curious, pulled a chair over and sat. You're not the Lady Jane Grey? A small, almost surprised laugh. Jane Grey? No, that poor girl was executed in the tower less than 500 years ago. I am Helena Ravenclaw. Ted nodded. The pieces clicked. Everyone in the castle assumed the Grey Lady was Queen Jane Grey. It was the simplest story. Helena Ravenclaw, daughter of Rowena, had been thought lost to history, and being the true Grey Lady was not common knowledge. Helena's expression turned inward. She began to speak slowly, then more freely, of old foolishness and long regrets, of choices that had scarred her memory. She spoke of lingering in the castle for centuries, of a loneliness that never ended. Being a ghost, she explained, was not a preservation of life, but a refusal or inability to move on. Helena Ravenclaw had been bound to the school for nearly 1,000 years by remorse and longing. Ted listened. She talked until the sky outside the high windows began to pale. At last, she broke off and turned to leave. He assured her he'd be fine. Don't worry about me, he said. I can sleep deeply. An hour or so usually does it. She smiled faintly. As she drifted toward the wall, Ted called after her. Oh, Helena, one more thing. When I first reached you, I thought there was another presence here besides you. Helena paused, half through the wall. Another presence? Yes. Ted pointed at the Ravenclaw bust. Perhaps something is hidden in it, or maybe it was just my imagination. Helena's face shadowed as she considered the idea. Then she slipped through the stone and was gone, leaving Ted alone beneath the painted stars, aware now of more than one secret lingering in Ravenclaw's halls. This morning was Charms, the joint lesson for Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. Professor Flitwick stood atop a stack of books, his head barely visible over the podium. Today we're going to learn the levitation charm, he announced. Does anyone know the incantation? He glanced toward Ted, but Ted was uncharacteristically distracted. It wasn't from lack of sleep. He'd had a deep, restorative rest, but he hadn't expected they'd cover levitation today. In the original story, that incantation figured in a lot of plots, and Ted had been half thinking about that. Since Ted didn't raise his hand, Flitwick called on Hermione. She answered correctly and earned 5 points. After she sat down, she turned slightly toward Ted and whispered, Ted, are you all right? You look a bit out of it. I'm fine, Ted whispered back. Just zoned out for a second. Hey, tomorrow's Halloween, isn't it? Hermione nodded. Yes, tonight's Halloween Eve. There's supposed to be a big feast at Hogwarts. Harry, who'd overheard, piped up eagerly. Reliable sources say Dumbledore's invited a famous skeleton dance troupe this year. Halloween, of course, October 31st. A Western festival of costumes, trick-or-treating, and spooky fun. In the wizarding world, something always seemed to happen around Halloween. It was almost a rule. Ted's mind darted through possibilities. No way Hermione would run off crying because of something Ron said behind her back. So what could occur? The troll? The thought made him grin. Professor Quirrell, despite his odd and timid demeanor in class, had impressed Ted outside of it. In private discussions about magical bloodlines, he'd revealed himself to be a brilliant, if eccentric, student, more of a specialist and borderline mad scientist. Ted had been mulling over Quirrell's performance the night before, more than paying attention in charms. Even so, the levitation charm was basic, given Ted's foundation. His first tries in class were clean. Then the little ping he'd come to expect appeared in his head. Ding! You have learned a new magic. Levitation charm. You have gained 80 experience. Another notification followed. Ding! After sustained study and practice, you have gained a deeper understanding of charms. Charms has leveled up to Elv 2. It felt like something unblocked inside him. Problems that had taken time to work through now snapped into place. A rush of insight fizzed at the edges of his mind. He imagined Professor Flitwick nodding approval, Dumbledore inclining his head, then laughed inwardly and got real. Using appraisal on Flitwick when he had the chance, Ted had seen the old professor's charms level, LV8. That was master-level territory, far beyond what most wizards ever reached. Ted had read a memorandum once on the dean's desk mentioning Flitwick's work into ancient magic. Between that and years of ordinary charms practice, Flitwick could decode almost any conventional charm, and often did so in days. Ted was only Charms LV2. His skill still had a long way to go. 2 months of lessons had nonetheless built a solid foundation. The class had covered Lumos, the wand light, the signal spell, 3 colored fireworks for communication, Incendio, a fire-starting spell that ranged from a mere lighter to a weapon at higher levels, and Diffindo, the cutting charm, useful for everyday tasks and in darker hands for severing limbs. Hogwarts taught a baseline. Ambitious students were expected to study beyond it. Ted liked that philosophy. The school laid out the path, and the rest was up to you. Ted's classmates picked up on his small victory. Ron and Neville sidled over after he successfully levitated the practice feather and asked for tips. Ted liked breaking things down, so he gave them a deliberately theatrical demonstration. "Don't be stiff when you wave," he said, half joking. "Think loose, lively, springy, shaky, lightning 5 whip. Watch this. Wingardium Leviosa," he said, and the feather obediently floated, drifting exactly as his wand directed. The others caught on and tried. Seamus's attempt ended with a smoky little explosion that singed his hair into a new, puffier hairstyle. Ron, more enthusiastic than careful, swished his wand like an orchestra conductor and nearly jabbed Jerry in the head. Jerry's wand slipped from his hand and went flying, only for Ted to catch it in midair with a smooth levitation charm. The classroom filled with laughter and good-natured chaos. Meanwhile, the Ravenclaw common room had been buzzing for a different reason. The Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's resident ghost, had been sitting listless before the Ravenclaw statue all morning. Unusual behavior for a ghost who normally drifted in and out on her own schedule. She stayed from early morning well into noon, in spite of the crowd and noise. When Ted and Hermione passed through after lunch, the Grey Lady was still there. She glanced at Ted, her pale expression changing for an instant before she slid away in silence. Hermione, who never missed a clue, leaned in and asked, "Do you know her?" "Yes," Ted said. "I've seen her before." "She seemed like she wanted to tell you something," Hermione said, eyes bright with curiosity. Ted hesitated. "Maybe it's because something I said this morning worried her." Hermione smiled, unperturbed. "Never mind. You should speak to her. We only have one class this afternoon. Catch her with a message, maybe a paper crane." She tucked her textbooks under her arm and walked off. 2 months at Hogwarts had already changed them all, more than just in what spells they could cast. They'd grown in knowledge, sure, but also in the kinds of friendships and responsibilities that made school feel like something real and important. Ted pocketed the thought as he headed toward charms again. The levitation charm humming gently like a new trick at his fingertips, and Halloween, with whatever surprises it promised, still waiting in the wings.